The auctioneer's voice cracked with disgust as he gestured toward the last girl on the platform. "What am I bid for this one? Look at the size of her. Strong as an ox, I'll grant you that." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Rhea Calder stood with her chin up, though her cheeks burned red as fire. The bids dropped from dollars to dimes, then to nickels. Silence fell. Then a voice like distant thunder rolled across the square. "I'll take her." Every head turned toward the mountain man they called the Ridge Bear. He stepped forward, silver dollar gleaming in his scarred palm. "I'll take the fat one." Now, before I take you deep into Rhea's journey from shame to strength, from rejection to belonging, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. And when you do, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales of courage and redemption travel across this beautiful country of ours. The workhouse smell never left you. Rhea Calder had scrubbed her skin raw that morning, used the last sliver of lye soap Sister Margaret had given her, but she could still smell it. The sour stench of boiled cabbage, unwashed bodies, and despair that seeped into the very walls of St. Cyprian's home for friendless girls. She'd lived there since she was 7 years old, when her mother died of consumption, and her father drank himself into a pauper's grave 6 months later. 14 years she'd spent in those gray stone halls, sleeping in a narrow cot among 20 other girls, working in the laundry until her hands cracked and bled, praying every night for deliverance that never came. Until today. Today was auction day in Ash Hollow, when the workhouse girls who'd reached their 21st year were brought to the town square to be placed with families who needed household help or men who needed wives. Sister Margaret called it Christian charity. The girls called it what it was, a flesh market where the prettiest went first and the plain ones went for cheap. Rhea knew which category she fell into. She stood now on the wooden platform in the center of the square, the September sun beating down on her uncovered head, while Thaddeus Boone, the auctioneer, worked his way through the line of girls. There had been 8 of them at dawn. Now only Rhea remained. "Come on, gentlemen," Boone called out, his voice hoarse from an hour of shouting. "Last one of the day. Look at those shoulders. This girl can work. Strong back, good teeth, no pox scars. What am I bid?" Rhea kept her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance, those purple peaks that ringed Ash Hollow like the walls of a prison. She would not look at the crowd, would not see the men evaluating her like livestock, or worse, the women whispering behind their hands about her size. She'd always been big, not just tall, though at 5'10" she towered over most women and many men, but broad, wide-shouldered, thick-waisted, with heavy breasts and hips that no amount of hunger could whittle down. In the workhouse, where every girl fought for scraps, her body had been a curse and a blessing both. A curse because it marked her as different, unfeminine, undesirable. A blessing because it made her strong enough to lift the heavy laundry tubs, to carry water buckets that would break a smaller girl's back. $5, someone called out half-heartedly. $5. Boone seized on it like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. "Do I hear 6? Silence. "Come now, gentlemen, this girl's worth more than $5. She'll work like a mule and eat like a bird. I've seen her at the workhouse. Hardly costs nothing to feed." That was a lie, but Rhea didn't bother to correct it. Let them think what they wanted. $4, another voice said, and Rhea's stomach dropped. The bidding was going backward. Wait, you can't bid down," Boone sputtered. "Can if nobody else is bidding up," the man replied. Rhea recognized him now, Silas Crenshaw, who owned the lumber mill on the east side of town. He had a wife and 6 children and a reputation for working his help half to death. $4 is generous for that one. Look at her." Against her better judgment, Rhea looked. Silas was a thin man with a mean mouth and eyes like chips of flint. His wife stood beside him, a worn-down woman with gray in her hair, though she couldn't be more than 30. Their gazes met for just a moment, and Rhea saw something in the woman's face. Not cruelty exactly, but a desperate kind of calculation. Another pair of hands to help with the endless work. Another body to stand between her and her husband's temper. $3, someone else offered, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Rhea's face burned. She'd known it would be bad, but this was worse than bad. This was humiliation refined to its purest form. $3? Boone's voice rose in outrage that sounded almost genuine. You insult me, sir. You insult this fine young woman. I won't accept less than $2, a woman called out, and the laughter grew louder. $1, someone shouted from the back, and now people were grinning openly, making a game of it. Boone mopped his face with a handkerchief. He looked at Sister Margaret, who stood at the edge of the platform with her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. The nun gave a tiny shake of her head. Take what you can get. Fine, Boone said heavily. $1. Going once. 50 cents. 25. A nickel and a plug of tobacco. The crowd was roaring now, people doubling over with laughter. Rhea felt something inside her go very cold and very quiet. This was what she was worth. This was what the world thought of her. She lifted her chin higher and stared at those distant mountains, imagining herself walking toward them, disappearing into the wilderness where no one would ever see her or judge her or find her lacking again. Enough, Boone slammed his hand on the podium. The bid stands at $1, going once, going twice. I'll take her. The voice cut through the noise like an axe through kindling, deep and rough, with an edge that made people step back instinctively. The laughter died. Rhea's eyes snapped to the source of the voice. A man stood at the back of the crowd, or rather, a mountain of a man. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the width of the square. His hair was long and dark, caught back with a strip of leather, and his face was hidden behind a thick black beard. He wore buckskin and fur, and across his back was strapped an enormous rifle that looked like it could bring down a buffalo. The crowd parted before him as he walked forward, not because anyone told them to, but because every instinct they possessed screamed at them to get out of his way. "Jonas Reddick," someone whispered, and the name passed through the crowd like a cold wind. Rhea had heard of Jonas Reddick. Everyone in Ash Hollow had heard of Jonas Reddick. They called him the Ridge Bear. Said he lived alone in a cabin high on Raven Ridge, 10 miles into the mountains where no decent person would venture. Said he'd been a soldier once, in the Indian Wars, and had seen things that drove him half mad. Said he could track anything on 4 legs or 2, could survive winter storms that would kill an ordinary man, could bring down a grizzly with nothing but a knife. Said he was dangerous. He stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at Rhea. His eyes were dark, almost black, and deeply set beneath heavy brows. His face was hard to read behind that beard, but his gaze was steady and measuring. He looked at her the way a man might look at a horse he was considering buying, evaluating, calculating, but not unkind. "How much?" he asked Boone, though his eyes never left Rhea. Well, the current bid is $1, but..." Jonas reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a silver dollar. He tossed it to Boone, who caught it clumsily. "There's your $1. But sir, there's paperwork, a contract to be signed, terms to be..." "I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." Jonas's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "You got a problem with my money?" No problem at all, Mr. Reddick, sir." Boone was suddenly all cooperation, practically falling over himself to produce the contract. "Just need your mark here, and the young lady's mark here, and..." "She got a name?" Jonas asked. "Rhea," Boone said, checking his ledger. "Rhea Calder." Jonas looked up at her again. "You can read and write, Rhea Calder?" It was the first time anyone had addressed her directly all day. Rhea found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "Yes." "Good." He jerked his chin toward the contract. "Come down here and read what you're signing. Make sure it says what it ought to say and nothing it oughtn't." It was such an unexpected kindness, assuming she could read, insisting she know what she was agreeing to, that Rhea felt something loosen in her chest. She climbed down from the platform, her legs shaky beneath her, and took the paper Boone offered. It was a standard indenture contract, the kind they used for all the workhouse placements. She would work for Jonas Reddick for a period of 3 years, during which time he would provide room and board and 1 set of clothing per season. She would receive no wages, but at the end of the 3 years she would be released from her obligation and given $5 in silver to start her new life. 3 years. It might as well have been a lifetime. But it was 3 years away from the workhouse. 3 years away from Sister Margaret's cold disapproval and the other girl's casual cruelty. 3 years in which she would have a roof over her head and food in her belly, and at the end of it, 5 whole dollars that would be hers alone. "It's fair," she said quietly. Jonas grunted. "Sign it, then." Rhea took the pen Boone offered and signed her name in careful letters at the bottom of the contract. Jonas made his mark, a simple X, beside hers. Sister Margaret signed as witness, her face unreadable. "There," Boone said, rolling up the paper with obvious relief. "All legal and proper. Mr. Reddick, the young lady is your responsibility now." "I know what responsibility is." Jonas turned and started walking toward the edge of the square without another word. Rhea stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. Then Sister Margaret gave her a little push between the shoulder blades. "Go on, girl. You belong to him now." Belong. The word tasted like ash in Rhea's mouth, but she gathered up her skirts, the threadbare gray dress that was her only possession besides the underclothes she wore, and hurried after Jonas Reddick. He didn't slow down for her, didn't look back to see if she was following. He just walked through Ash Hollow with that same ground-eating stride, past the general store and the saloon and the blacksmith's shop, past the church with its whitewashed steeple and the bank with its false front, past the last of the painted houses and into the scrubland beyond. Rhea followed, her heart pounding. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of the crowd, voices rising as people started to talk about what had just happened. Let them talk. She had nothing left to lose. A wagon waited at the edge of town, hitched to a massive draft horse the color of old iron. Jonas climbed up onto the seat and took the reins, then glanced down at Rhea. "You ride or walk?" "I can ride." He jerked his head toward the back of the wagon. "Climb in." The wagon bed was empty except for some burlap sacks and a folded blanket. Rhea pulled herself up, her muscles protesting. She'd been standing on that platform for hours, and settled herself against the side. Jonas clicked his tongue at the horse, and they lurched into motion. They rode in silence. The road, little more than 2 ruts worn into the dirt, wound through stands of scrub oak and juniper, then began to climb. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation. The sun slanted lower in the sky, painting the mountains gold and purple and rose. Rhea watched the landscape roll past and tried not to think about what came next. Tried not to wonder what kind of man Jonas Reddick really was, or what he wanted with a girl like her. Men didn't buy women at auction out of charity. They wanted something, work, usually. Sometimes a wife. Sometimes other things, things the sisters at the workhouse had warned about in hushed, horrified voices. But Jonas had given her the contract to read, had paid a full $1 when he could have gotten her for pennies, had called her by name. Maybe, Rhea thought with a flutter of desperate hope, maybe he was just a man who needed help with his household and was willing to pay fair for it. The road grew steeper. The scrubland gave way to ponderosa pines, their bark glowing orange in the fading light. A creek appeared beside the road, rushing and clear, and Jonas stopped the wagon long enough to let the horse drink. "You thirsty?" he asked without turning around. "Yes." "Water's good here. Drink your fill." Rhea climbed down from the wagon and knelt beside the creek. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but it tasted sweet and clean, nothing like the tepid well water at the workhouse. She drank until her stomach felt tight, then splashed her face and neck, washing away the dust and sweat of the day. When she climbed back into the wagon, Jonas handed her a piece of jerky without a word. Rhea took it, surprised again by the unexpected kindness. The jerky was tough and salty, but she gnawed on it gratefully as they continued up the mountain. The sun was setting by the time they reached Raven Ridge. The road, if it could even be called a road anymore, ended in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. In the center of the clearing stood a cabin, built of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. It was larger than Rhea had expected, with a steeply pitched roof and a covered porch that ran along the front. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and there were shutters on the windows painted a dark green that was barely visible in the gathering dusk. It looked, Rhea thought with something like wonder, almost cozy. Jonas climbed down from the wagon and began unhitching the horse. "Cabin's open," he said over his shoulder. "Go on in and light a lamp. There's matches on the shelf by the door." Rhea hesitated, then did as she was told. The cabin door was heavy but swung open smoothly on leather hinges. Inside it was dim and cool, smelling of wood smoke and pine. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out a large main room with a stone fireplace at one end, a rough table and chairs in the center, and a sleeping loft above. There was a smaller door on the back wall, probably leading to a storage room or root cellar. She found the matches where Jonas had said they'd be and lit the oil lamp that hung from a beam. Warm light flooded the room, revealing details she'd missed in the dimness. The furniture was handmade but well crafted, the floor swept clean, the dishes on the shelf neatly stacked. There was a rocking chair by the fireplace, a braided rug in front of it, a shelf full of books, actual books, more than Rhea had ever seen outside the workhouse library. It was a home, a real home, lived in and cared for. Not what she'd expected from a man they called the Ridge Bear. The door opened and Jonas came in, carrying the burlap sacks from the wagon. He set them down by the door and hung his rifle on pegs mounted on the wall. "You hungry?" Yes." He moved to the fireplace and stirred up the coals, adding kindling and a few split logs until flames began to lick upward. From one of the sacks, he pulled out a wrapped package that proved to be bacon, and from another, potatoes and onions. He set a cast iron skillet on a crane over the fire and began slicing the bacon into it with a knife that looked like it could field dress a elk. Rhea watched, uncertain what she should be doing. At the workhouse, she'd worked in the laundry, not the kitchen. She could scrub and wring and hang, but cooking was a mystery to her. "You know how to cook?" Jonas asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Not really," he grunted. "I'll teach you. Can't have you starving because you don't know how to make a meal." He worked with the easy efficiency of a man who'd been taking care of himself for a long time. The bacon sizzled and popped in the skillet. He added sliced potatoes and onions, stirred everything together, let it cook until the potatoes were tender and golden at the edges. The smell made Rhea's mouth water. When it was ready, he divided the food between 2 tin plates and handed her one, along with a fork. "Eat." They sat at the table and Rhea ate. The food was simple but good, better than anything she'd had in months. Years, maybe. At the workhouse, meals had been thin gruel and hard bread, watery soup and boiled cabbage. This was real food, hot and filling, seasoned with salt and pepper. Jonas ate in silence, his attention on his plate. When he was finished, he stood and poured coffee from a pot that had been warming at the edge of the fire. He poured 2 cups and set one in front of Rhea. "Thank you," she said quietly. He sat back down and studied her over the rim of his cup. "You scared of me?" The question was so direct it caught Rhea off guard. She considered lying, then decided against it. "A little. That's smart." He took a sip of coffee. "I'm not going to hurt you, but it's smart to be cautious. You don't know me." "No," Rhea agreed. "I don't. Here's what you need to know." Jonas set down his cup and leaned back in his chair. "I live alone because I like it that way. Quiet, simple. But I'm getting older, and there's work here I can't keep up with on my own. I need help with the garden, the chickens, the preserving. I need someone to cook and keep the place clean while I'm out hunting or trapping. That's why I bought your contract." "Not because—" Rhea stopped, feeling her face heat. "Not because I want a wife," Jonas finished bluntly. "I had a wife once. She's dead. I'm not looking to replace her." There was something in his voice when he said it, not grief exactly, but a kind of flat finality that told Rhea this was not a subject open for discussion. "I understand," she said. "Good." He gestured toward the small door at the back of the room. "That room there is yours. I sleep in the loft. You'll have privacy. I'll respect that. And I expect you to respect mine. You work hard. You'll be treated fair. You don't cause trouble. We won't have trouble. Understood?" "Understood." "One more thing." Jonas looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You ever want to leave? I mean really leave, not just run off in a fit of temper. You come to me and we'll tear up that contract. I don't hold with keeping people who don't want to be kept. You're here because you signed a paper, but you're also here of your own free will. That matters to me. Clear?" Rhea felt something in her chest crack open just a little, letting in a thin ray of light. "Clear." "All right then." Jonas stood and gathered up the plates. "I'll show you your room. Get some rest. We'll start fresh in the morning." He opened the small door and stood back to let her pass. The room beyond was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and small trunk it contained, but it had a window that looked out onto the forest, and there was a quilt on the bed, faded but clean, in a pattern of stars. "Trunk's empty," Jonas said. "You got anything to put in it?" "No." "We'll go to town next week. Get you some proper clothes. Can't work in that." He nodded at her threadbare dress. "I can't. The contract doesn't say—" "The contract says I provide clothing. I'm providing it. Don't argue." Rhea closed her mouth. She was too tired to argue anyway. Too overwhelmed by the strangeness of the day, by the unexpected turn her life had taken. Jonas backed out of the small room. "Good night," Rhea called her. "Good night." He closed the door, and Rhea was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the tiny room, her room, at least for the next 3 years, and felt tears prick her eyes. Not sad tears. Not exactly. She didn't know what kind of tears they were. She thought about the auction platform, about standing there while men bid on her like she was a horse or a plow. Thought about the laughter, the casual cruelty, the humiliation that had seared itself into her bones. Then she thought about Jonas Reddick stepping forward. "I'll take her." Not mocking, not cruel, just matter of fact, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'll take the fat one." Rhea lay down on the bed without undressing and pulled the star quilt over herself. Through the window, she could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, bright and cold and impossibly distant. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in 14 years, fell asleep in a room where she was alone, where no one could hear her breathe or steal her blanket or whisper cruel things in the darkness. Where she was, if not quite safe, at least unseen. And for now, that was enough. The days settled into a rhythm. Jonas woke before dawn every morning, built up the fire, and made coffee. By the time Rhea emerged from her room, there would be bacon or venison sizzling in the skillet, and Jonas would be preparing to head out for the day, checking his traps, hunting, or working on whatever project the season demanded. He was a man of few words, but the words he did speak were clear and direct. He showed Rhea how to tend the chickens, how to milk the goat that lived in a small pen behind the cabin, how to work the vegetable garden that was now going dormant for winter. He taught her to make cornbread and biscuits, to render fat and cure meat, to tell when vegetables were ready to pick and when to let them grow another day. He never raised his voice, never grabbed her arm or shoved her or struck her, even when she made mistakes, and she made plenty of them. When she burned the biscuits black, he just scraped off the worst of the char and ate them anyway. When she forgot to latch the chicken coop and came out in the morning to find feathers everywhere and 2 hens missing, he spent the afternoon tracking down the fox responsible instead of berating her for her carelessness. "Foxes are clever," was all he said when he came back with the fox's pelt. "You'll remember next time." She did. The work was hard. Harder than the workhouse laundry in some ways because it was so varied and unceasing, but it was also strangely satisfying. At the end of each day, Rhea could see what she'd accomplished. Clean dishes, swept floors, mended clothes hanging on the line, a garden plot cleared and ready for spring planting. It felt real in a way the endless, repetitive laundry work never had. And Jonas, for all his silence, was not unkind. He brought her wildflowers once, a handful of late-blooming asters he'd found on the ridge. He carved her a wooden spoon when hers split. When she admired the books on his shelf, he told her she was welcome to read any of them, anytime she wanted. "You like reading?" he asked. "I do." Rhea ran her fingers over the spines, works by Shakespeare and Dickens, a volume of Whitman's poetry, a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe. "I didn't think a mountain man would have books?" Jonas's mouth quirked beneath his beard. "My father was a school teacher. He made sure I could read before he died. Figured it was a skill that might save my life someday. It has, more than once." "How?" Rhea asked, curious despite herself. "Medical texts taught me how to set a broken leg and treat a rattlesnake bite. Survival manual kept me alive my first winter in the mountains. History book reminded me that hard times pass." He shrugged. "Books are tools, same as an axe or a rifle. Treat them right. They'll serve you well." After that, Rhea read every evening after supper. She'd curl up in the rocking chair by the fire while Jonas worked on his traps or carved new handles for tools, and she'd lose herself in other worlds, other lives. Sometimes Jonas would ask her what she was reading, and she'd tell him, and he'd nod and say something brief but insightful that showed he'd read the same book and thought about it deeply. Those evenings were peaceful in a way Rhea had never experienced before. No one shouting, no one crying, no one fighting over scraps or spreading cruel gossip, just the crackle of the fire, the scratch of Jonas's knife on wood, the whisper of pages turning. It was almost, Rhea hardly dared think it, it was almost like having a home. But peace, as Rhea had learned young, was a fragile thing. It was the 3rd week of October when the tinker came. Rhea was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard the jangle of harness and the creak of wagon wheels. Jonas was out checking his trap line, wouldn't be back until evening. She dried her hands on her apron and walked around to the front of the cabin, cautious. A small covered wagon had pulled into the clearing, drawn by a sway-backed mule. The driver was an old man, thin as a rail, with long white hair pulled back in a tail and a face like tanned leather. He wore a patchwork coat that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric had been. "Afternoon, miss," he called out in a voice that creaked like an unoiled hinge. "Name's Everett Shaw. I'm a tinker, pots mended, knives sharpened, goods for trade. Your husband about?" "I don't have a husband," Rhea said carefully. "Mr. Reddick isn't here right now." "Reddick?" The old man's eyebrows shot up. "You're living with Jonas Reddick? I work for him." "Ah." Everett nodded knowingly. "Well, you tell Jonas that old Everett came by. We're friends from way back. He'll want to know I was here." Something about the way he said it made Rhea study him more closely. "You know Mr. Reddick?" "Knew him when he was just a pup, working as a scout for the army. That was before—" Everett stopped himself. "Well, before a lot of things. You need anything mended, miss? I do good work, fair prices. I don't have any money. Trade goods then. You got eggs, preserves? I'll take whatever you got." Rhea thought about the cracked mixing bowl she'd been meaning to mention to Jonas. "Wait here." She fetched the bowl and 3 jars of the applesauce she'd made the week before. Everett examined the bowl, produced a strange-smelling paste and some metal strips, and went to work. His hands moved with the sureness of long practice, and within 10 minutes the bowl was mended. Not perfectly, but well enough that it would hold together. "There you are, miss. Good as new." He accepted the jars of applesauce and tucked them into his wagon. "You tell Jonas I said hello. Tell him—" He paused, looking troubled. "Tell him I still got that thing he asked me to watch over. Tell him it's time." "I don't understand." "He will." Everett climbed back onto his wagon seat and gathered up the reins. "You take care of yourself up here, miss. Jonas is a good man, but he carries a heavy load. Don't let it crush you, too." Before Rhea could ask what he meant, the old tinker clicked to his mule and rattled away down the mountain road. Rhea stood in the clearing, the mended bowl in her hands, and felt a cold finger of unease trace down her spine. When Jonas returned that evening, Rhea told him about Everett Shaw's visit. She expected surprise, maybe, or curiosity. Instead, Jonas went very still. His face, what she could see of it above the beard, went pale. "What exactly did he say?" "That he's a friend of yours, that he still has something you asked him to watch over, that it's time." Rhea hesitated. He looked worried. Jonas sat down heavily at the table and put his head in his hands. For a long moment, he didn't speak. "Mr. Reddick?" Rhea ventured. "Is everything all right?" "No." His voice was muffled. "No, everything is not all right." He raised his head and looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Rhea saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, deep and cold. "Rhea," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something. And after I tell you, you might want to tear up that contract and leave. I wouldn't blame you if you did." Rhea's heart began to pound. "What is it?" Jonas took a deep breath, let it out slowly. 3 years ago, I did something. Something I'm not proud of, but something I'd do again if I had to. And now, he stopped, struggling with the words. Now it's come back, and it's going to bring trouble with it. Maybe danger. And I'm sorry, Rhea. I'm so sorry, but you're here, and that means you're part of it, whether you want to be or not. Part of what? Rhea whispered. Jonas looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the door, staring out into the gathering darkness. "I have a son," he said quietly. "He's 3 years old. His name is Liam, and Everett Shaw has been keeping him safe for me down in the lowlands. But now," his hands clenched on the doorframe, "now someone's looking for him, someone dangerous, and Everett's bringing him here, where I can protect him." Ria's mind reeled. A son. Jonas had a son. "But you said your wife died," she managed. "She did. 5 years ago, in childbirth. The baby died with her." Jonas's voice was flat, drained of emotion. "Liam's mother was someone else. Someone I met after, someone who—" He stopped, started again. "She was Navajo. We weren't married. When she got pregnant, her people cast her out, said she dishonored them by lying with a white man. She died when Liam was born, and I—" He turned to face Ria, and his face was twisted with old grief. "I couldn't keep him. I was barely keeping myself alive up here. A baby would have died in his first winter. So I gave him to Everett, asked him to find a family in one of the settlements who'd take him. Paid him everything I had to make sure the boy would be cared for. But now someone's looking for him," Ria said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Someone who doesn't want a mixed-blood child to live." Jonas's voice was savage. "There are people in this territory who think any child with Indian blood is an abomination. They're calling it purity laws now, making it official. Authorized hunters going from town to town looking for children like Liam, taking them away. And Everett got word that someone reported seeing a boy with dark skin and black eyes being cared for by a white family. They're asking questions, getting close. So he's bringing him here." "Yes." Jonas met her eyes. "I'm going to keep my son. I don't care what the law says. I don't care who comes for him. He's mine, and he stays. But that means—" He swallowed hard. "That means there will be trouble. Men with badges and guns, maybe worse. And you're here, in the middle of it." Ria's thoughts spun. A child. A 3-year-old child whose only crime was having the wrong color skin, the wrong shape to his eyes, and men hunting him like an animal. She thought about the workhouse, about the children who'd come and gone over the years, the ones who were adopted by cruel families, or who ran away and were never seen again, or who simply gave up and faded like old cloth. She thought about how the strong preyed on the weak, how power and privilege trampled dignity and mercy. She thought about Jonas asking her to read the contract before she signed it, about him teaching her to cook and letting her read his books, about him paying a full $1 when he could have had her for pennies. She looked at this man who lived alone in the mountains because he'd lost everyone he loved and who was now willing to face danger, maybe death, to protect a child who needed him. "When will they arrive?" she asked steadily. Jonas blinked. "What?" "Everett and your son. When will they get here?" "Tomorrow, probably. Maybe the day after. But Ria, then we'd better get ready." Ria moved past him to the shelf where the extra blankets were kept. "The loft is too open. He'll need a proper room. We can partition off part of the main room, make him a space down here where it's warm, and we'll need more food stores. A child that age will need milk and soft foods. Do you have any—" "Ria." Jonas caught her arm gently. "You don't have to do this." She looked up at him, this mountain of a man who'd shown her more kindness in 3 weeks than she'd known in her entire life, who'd given her work and shelter and dignity, who'd never once made her feel small, even though she knew the world saw her that way. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Something shifted in Jonas's face. His eyes grew bright, and for a moment Ria thought he might actually cry. But he just nodded, gripped her arm once more, firm and warm and grateful, and let her go. "All right then," he said roughly. "All right, let's get ready." They worked through the night. Jonas built a partition wall using boards he'd been saving for repairs, creating a small room in the corner of the cabin. Ria sewed curtains from an old sheet, made up a small bed with the softest blankets she could find. Jonas carved a set of wooden toys, a horse, a dog, a bird. Ria baked extra bread and made a pot of hearty stew that would be easy for a small child to eat. By dawn, the cabin had been transformed. There was a child's room now, small but cozy, with a window that looked out onto the forest and a little shelf for treasures. There was food enough to last a week or more. There was space made for one more person in this house of two. They sat at the table as the sun rose, exhausted but ready. Jonas poured coffee and looked at Rhea across the steam. "Thank you," he said quietly. Rhea wrapped her hands around her cup and looked at the small curtained room they'd created. "What do I call him when he gets here?" "Liam. Just Liam. He's too young to understand all the rest of it. The danger, the hate. To him, I'm just his papa who he hasn't seen in a while." "Will he remember you?" "I don't know." Jonas's voice cracked just a little. "I hope so. God, I hope so." They waited. The morning passed in tense silence. Rhea tried to do normal chores, feeding the chickens, sweeping the floor, but her eyes kept going to the road, watching for dust, listening for wheels. It was mid-afternoon when they came. Rhea heard the wagon first, that familiar jangle of harness and creak of wood. She and Jonas both moved to the door. The old tinker's wagon rolled into the clearing, and this time there was a small figure sitting beside Everett on the bench. Jonas made a sound, low and broken, and strode out to meet them. The boy was tiny, dark-haired, and dark-eyed, wearing clothes that were too big for his small frame. When he saw Jonas, his face lit up with sudden, brilliant recognition. "Papa!" he cried, and launched himself off the wagon before Everett could catch him. Jonas caught him instead, swept him up in his arms and held him tight, his whole body shaking. The boy wrapped his small arms around Jonas's neck and buried his face against his father's shoulder, chattering in a mix of English and words Rhea didn't recognize. Everett climbed down stiffly from the wagon. He looked old and tired and deeply worried. "I'm sorry, Jonas. I kept him as long as I could. But they're closing in. There's a man, calls himself Agent Thorne. He's been going settlement to settlement, town to town, with a list of names. Half-breed children, he calls them. Says it's his duty to God and country to remove them from white society. He'll be here within the week, I'd wager." Jonas nodded, still holding his son. "I understand. You did right, Everett. Thank you." The old tinker's eyes shifted to Rhea, standing in the doorway. "You're still here." "I'm still here," Rhea said. "Good." Everett smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "Jonas needs all the help he can get. Take care of each other." He climbed back onto his wagon. "I'll spread word in the lowlands that the boy disappeared, that I lost track of him. Might buy you some time." "Everett, don't thank me, Jonas. I owed you. We're even now." He raised a hand in farewell and turned the wagon back toward the road. Jonas carried Liam toward the cabin. The boy had gone quiet now, his small face pressed against his father's neck. As they passed Rhea, Liam peeked out at her with enormous dark eyes full of wariness and wonder. "Liam," Jonas said gently, "this is Rhea. She's—" He hesitated, then said simply, "She's family. She's going to help take care of you." "Hello, Liam," Rhea said softly. The boy studied her for a long moment. Then, with the sudden decisiveness of the very young, he smiled. "Hello." That smile was like a key turning in a lock. Something in Rhea's chest opened wide, letting in light and warmth and a fierce, protective love she'd never felt before. This child would be safe. She would make sure of it. Whatever came next, whoever came looking, they would face it together. She stepped aside to let Jonas carry his son into their home, and as she closed the door behind them, Rhea Calder made a promise to herself and to the small boy with his father's eyes. No one would take him, not while she still drew breath. Not while there was still fight left in her. Not ever. Liam fell asleep in Jonas's arms before they'd even made it through the door. The journey from the lowlands must have exhausted him. That and the overwhelming emotion of being reunited with his father. Jonas carried him to the small room they'd prepared and laid him gently on the bed, pulling the quilt up over his small shoulders. The boy didn't stir, just curled onto his side with one thumb finding its way to his mouth. Rhea stood in the doorway, watching. Jonas knelt beside the bed for a long moment, his hand resting on his son's dark hair, his face twisted with an emotion too complex to name. Finally, he rose and moved past Rhea into the main room, closing the curtain behind them. "He's gotten so big," Jonas said, his voice rough. 3 years. I missed 3 years of his life." "You did what you had to do to keep him alive," Rhea said quietly. "That's what matters." Jonas nodded, but his eyes were haunted. He moved to the window and stared out at the darkening forest. Agent Thorne? Everett said his name was Thorne. I've heard of him. Used to be a preacher back east, got run out for some scandal or other. Now he's appointed himself the moral guardian of the territory, hunting down children whose only crime is having the wrong blood in their veins. What will you do when he comes? I don't know yet. Jonas's hands clenched on the windowsill. The laws on his side, at least on paper, these purity laws, they're new, but they're real. A man with a badge can take a child away from its family if he deems that child a threat to white society. No trial, no appeal. Just gone. Rhea felt ice settle in her stomach. But Liam is your son. That won't matter to Thorne. Might make it worse, in fact. White man who'd father a child with an Indian woman, he'd see that as an even greater sin. Jonas turned from the window, his face hard. But I won't let him take Liam. I don't care what the law says. Some things are more important than law. They ate a cold supper in near silence, both of them listening for sounds from the small curtained room. But Liam slept on, peaceful and undisturbed, while outside the cabin the night gathered close and the forest whispered its ancient secrets. The next morning, Liam woke with the dawn. Rhea heard him stirring and went to the curtained doorway, peeking through. The boy was sitting up in bed, looking around the unfamiliar room with wide eyes. When he saw her, he froze. "Good morning," Rhea said gently. "Do you remember me? From yesterday?" Liam nodded slowly. "Are you hungry? I'm making breakfast. Your papa's feeding the chickens, but he'll be back soon." At the mention of Jonas, Liam's face brightened. He scrambled out of bed, still wearing the overlarge clothes he'd arrived in, and padded across the floor on bare feet. Rhea held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation he took it. His fingers were small and warm in hers. She led him to the table and lifted him onto one of the chairs, then went to the fireplace where porridge was bubbling in a pot. She ladled out a bowl, added honey and a splash of milk from the goat, and set it in front of him with a spoon. Liam ate like he was afraid the food might disappear, quick, hungry bites, his eyes darting around the room. Rhea recognized that behavior. It was how the younger children at the workhouse ate, the ones who'd learned that food was a precious thing that could be taken away at any moment. "There's plenty more," she said softly. "You can have as much as you want." He looked at her with those enormous dark eyes, assessing whether to believe her. Then he nodded and went back to eating, a little slower this time. The door opened and Jonas came in, bringing the cold morning air with him. When Liam saw his father, his whole face transformed. He dropped his spoon and scrambled down from the chair, running to Jonas with arms outstretched. Jonas caught him up, lifting him high until the boy squealed with delight, then settled him on his hip. "Did you sleep well?" "Uh-huh. The bed's soft, and there's a window," Liam pointed. "I can see trees." "That's right. There are trees all around us here, pine trees, bigger than any house. And up higher on the mountain, there are aspens that turn gold in the fall. Can we go see them?" Jonas's expression grew complicated. "Maybe. We'll see." He set Liam back at the table and the boy returned to his porridge, chattering now about the journey from the lowlands, about Everett's mule who'd tried to eat his hat, about a dog he'd seen in one of the settlements they'd passed through. His words tumbled over each other in his excitement, mixing English with phrases in another language that Rhea assumed was Navajo. Jonas listened with fierce attention, as if trying to memorize every word, every inflection. When Liam finished eating, Jonas said, "How about we get you some proper clothes? Those are about to fall right off you." They spent the morning fashioning new clothes for Liam from fabric Jonas had stored away. Sturdy pants and a shirt that would stand up to a child's rough play. Rhea did the sewing while Jonas kept Liam entertained, showing him the carved toys he'd made, teaching him the names of the chickens, letting him help gather eggs from the coop. Watching them together, Rhea felt something shift in her chest. The way Jonas's whole body seemed to soften around his son. The way Liam looked up at his father with absolute trust and adoration. It was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once, this love that had survived 3 years of separation and now existed under the shadow of an approaching threat. The day passed in relative peace. Liam explored his new home with the fearless curiosity of a child who felt safe, climbing on furniture and asking endless questions about everything he saw. Jonas answered each question with patience, never dismissing or diminishing the boy's wonder. But as the sun began to set, Jonas grew quiet and watchful, his eyes constantly going to the road. Rhea understood. Every hour that passed was an hour closer to when Agent Thorne might arrive. Every moment of peace was borrowed time. That night, after Liam had been put to bed, a process that involved 2 stories, 3 drinks of water, and multiple reassurances that Papa would still be there in the morning, Jonas and Rhea sat by the fire. "Tomorrow I'll ride down to Ash Hollow," Jonas said. "See what news I can gather. If Thorne's been asking questions, people will be talking about it." "What if he's already there? What if he's asking about you?" "Then I'll know what I'm dealing with." Jonas stared into the flames. "I won't let him take Liam by surprise. Better to face him on my terms than his." "I'll stay with Liam." "Yes." Jonas looked at her. "Rhea, if something happens, if Thorne comes here while I'm gone, I won't let him in. He might have legal authority. He might have men with him. I still won't let him in." Rhea's voice was steady. "You have my word." Jonas studied her for a long moment. "I believe you. But Rhea, don't put yourself in danger for us. Don't throw your life away for what? For a child who needs protection? For a man who's shown me more kindness than anyone else in my life?" Rhea shook her head. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what I stand for." Something in Jonas's expression shifted, grew soft. "You're a remarkable woman," Rhea called her. She felt her face heat. "I'm just doing what's right. That's what makes you remarkable." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, while outside the wind picked up and the pines swayed, and somewhere in the darkness an owl called out its hunting cry. Jonas left before dawn the next morning, his rifle across his back and his face grim with determination. Rhea stood in the doorway with Liam on her hip. The boy had woken when he heard his father moving around and refused to be left in bed, and watched until Jonas disappeared down the mountain road. "Where's Papa going?" Liam asked, his voice small. "To town. He'll be back before dark." "Will you stay with me?" "Yes." Rhea tightened her arms around him. "I'll stay with you." The day stretched long and tense. Rhea tried to keep Liam occupied, teaching him simple chores, playing with the wooden toys Jonas had carved, reading to him from a book of fairy tales she found on the shelf. But her attention was divided, always listening for the sound of approaching horses, always watching the road. It was mid-afternoon when she heard it, hoofbeats, moving fast, too fast for Jonas's steady draft horse. Rhea's heart began to pound. She set Liam down and moved to the window, peering out. 3 riders were coming up the road. The man in front wore a black suit and a wide-brimmed hat, and even from a distance Rhea could see the glint of a badge on his chest. Behind him rode 2 younger men, both armed with rifles. Agent Thorne had found them. "Liam," Rhea said, keeping her voice calm though her pulse raced, "I need you to go to your room and be very, very quiet. Can you do that for me?" The boy's eyes went wide. He'd heard the fear in her voice despite her efforts to hide it. "Is it bad men?" "I don't know yet, but just in case, I need you to hide. Go to your room and get under the bed. Don't come out until I call you. Understand?" Liam nodded and ran to his small room, disappearing behind the curtain. Rhea heard the soft sound of him crawling under the bed, then silence. She moved to the door and positioned herself in front of it, her hands clenched at her sides. Through the window, she watched the 3 men dismount. The one in the black suit, Thorne, it had to be, was tall and thin, with a narrow face and eyes like chips of ice. He had the look of a fanatic, someone who believed absolutely in the righteousness of his cause. He knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps. Rhea didn't move. "Open up," Thorne called. "This is official business. Open the door or we'll open it for you." Rhea's mind raced. She couldn't fight 3 armed men, but she also couldn't let them in, couldn't let them find Liam. She reached for the heavy iron poker that leaned against the fireplace and gripped it tight. "I said open the door!" Thorne's voice rose, sharp with authority and impatience. Rhea took a deep breath and opened the door just wide enough to see out. "This is private property. State your business." Thorne's lips curled in something that might have been a smile. "Private property belonging to Jonas Reddick, I believe. I'm Agent Cyrus Thorne, appointed by the Territorial Governor to enforce the Purity Protection Act. I have reason to believe there's a child on these premises, a half-breed boy, who falls under the jurisdiction of said act. I'm here to take custody of him. There's no child here. I think there is. Thorne moved closer, and Rhea caught the smell of him, soap and pomade, and underneath it something sour, like milk gone bad. A tinker named Shaw was seen traveling north with a dark-skinned boy. That trail led here. Now stand aside or I'll charge you with obstruction. You have no authority to enter this home without Mr. Reddick's permission. I have every authority. Thorne pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and thrust it toward her. This is a warrant signed by Judge Alderson himself, granting me the right to search any property in this territory where I suspect a child in violation of the act might be harbored. Now move. Rhea didn't move. Behind Thorne, the two younger men had fanned out, their hands on their rifles. They looked nervous, uncertain, not professional lawmen, just boys playing at being deputies because it gave them power over others. Mr. Reddick will be back soon, Rhea said, hating the way her voice shook. You can discuss this with him then. I don't need his permission. I don't need anyone's permission. Thorne's voice went cold. Last chance, girl. Move aside or I'll have my men move you aside. Rhea gripped the poker tighter. No. Thorne's face darkened. He nodded to the two men behind him. Willis, Carter, get her out of the way. The younger of the two men, Willis, a boy who couldn't be more than 19, started forward reluctantly. But before he could reach the door, another voice rang out across the clearing. That's far enough. Everyone froze. Jonas stood at the edge of the clearing, his rifle pointed directly at Agent Thorne's chest. He must have seen the horses from the road and come up quietly through the trees. His face was stone, his eyes cold as winter. Jonas Reddick, Thorne said, recovering his composure with visible effort. Just the man I wanted to see. I have a warrant to search your property for. I know what you have a warrant for. Jonas moved closer, the rifle never wavering. And I'm telling you to get off my land. You're harboring a fugitive, a child in violation of the Purity Protection Act. There's no child here. Rhea told you that. Then you won't mind if we search. I mind very much. Jonas's finger moved to the trigger. This is my home, my property. You got no right to come here threatening my household. Thorne's thin face flushed with anger. I have every right. The law is on my side. The law's an ass, Jonas said flatly. Always has been. Now turn around and ride back down this mountain before someone gets hurt. The two younger men shifted nervously, their hands tightening on their rifles. Rhea could see the calculation in their eyes. Was Jonas Reddick really dangerous enough to shoot 3 men? Was this worth dying over? You're making a mistake, Thorne said, his voice tight with fury. I'll return with more men. I'll get a federal marshal. You can't hide the boy forever. Watch me. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the promise of violence. Then Thorne took a step back, his hands raised in a mockery of surrender. This isn't over, Reddick. I'll be back. And when I come back, I'll have the full force of the law with me. You'll hang for this. Maybe, Jonas said, but you'll be dead, so you won't get to see it. Thorne stared at him with eyes full of cold hatred, then turned and stalked to his horse. The two younger men followed, mounting up quickly. They rode out of the clearing at a gallop, and the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Jonas didn't lower the rifle until they were completely gone. Then he let out a long, shaking breath and leaned the gun against the cabin wall. His hands were trembling. Rhea stepped out onto the porch. Are you all right? No. Jonas looked at her with haunted eyes. But we don't have time for me to fall apart. They'll be back, Rhea. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, but they'll be back. And next time they'll have more men, more guns. We can't win this fight. Then what do we do? Jonas was silent for a long moment. Then he straightened his shoulders, and Rhea saw determination settle over him like armor. We leave, tonight. Take Liam and go somewhere Thorne can't find us. Where? North, into the high country. There are places up there where no one goes, places where we could winter over. It'll be hard, but... Papa? They both turned. Liam stood in the doorway, his small face pale and frightened. Papa, who were those men? Why were they angry? Jonas crossed to his son in 2 strides and scooped him up. Just some bad men, that's all. But they're gone now. Will they come back? Jonas hesitated, then said with painful honesty, maybe. But if they do, we won't be here. We're going on an adventure, you and me and Rhea. Would you like that? Liam's expression brightened cautiously. An adventure? That's right. Up into the mountains where the aspens grow. We'll see elk and maybe even a bear. It'll be cold, but we'll be together. That's what matters. Liam wrapped his arms around Jonas's neck. Okay, Papa, I like adventures. Jonas's eyes closed briefly, and Rhea saw him struggle with emotion. When he opened them again, his gaze found hers over Liam's dark head. Start packing, he said quietly. Everything we'll need for 3 months in the wilderness. Food, blankets, medicine. We leave as soon as it's dark. Rhea nodded and went inside. Her hands were still shaking, but her mind was clear. They had maybe 6 hours until full dark. 6 hours to pack a lifetime into what they could carry. 6 hours to prepare for a winter in the high country that might kill them as surely as Agent Thorne's men. But at least they'd be together. At least they'd be fighting for something that mattered. She pulled down packs and began filling them with supplies, her movements quick and efficient. Beans, flour, salt pork, cornmeal, blankets, and extra clothes. The medical kit Jonas kept in the chest by the door. Matches and candles. Rope and an axe and the whetstone for sharpening knives. Jonas worked beside her, his face set in grim lines. He loaded ammunition, packed his traps and fishing line, rolled up the bearskin rug that would serve as extra insulation. Liam tried to help, carrying small items from one place to another with solemn concentration. As the sun sank toward the horizon, Jonas went to the loft and came down with a small wooden box. He opened it carefully, and Rhea saw papers inside. Land deeds, maybe, or letters. Jonas pulled out a folded document and stared at it for a long moment. What is it? Rhea asked. Liam's baptismal certificate. His mother, before she died, she asked the mission priest to baptize him. Wanted him to have that protection, she said. Wanted him to be Christian in the eyes of the law. Jonas's voice was bitter. Lot of good that does him now. Bring it anyway, Rhea said. You never know what might matter. Jonas nodded and tucked the certificate into his shirt pocket close to his heart. They ate a cold supper as the last light faded from the sky. Liam, exhausted by the day's excitement and fear, fell asleep at the table. Jonas carried him to the small bed and wrapped him in a blanket, then came back to where Rhea was finishing the packing. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I need to tell you before we go. Rhea looked up from the pack she was tying shut. What is it? Jonas sat down heavily at the table. When I said Liam's mother died in childbirth, that was true. But there's more to it than that. Her name was Nyla. She was the daughter of a Navajo elder, a healer. When her father found out she was pregnant with a white man's child, he cast her out, told her she was dead to her people. He rubbed his face with both hands. She came to me terrified and alone. I took her in, cared for her as best I could. But I was still half wild then, still drinking too much, still running from my own ghosts. When Liam was born, the delivery went wrong. There was blood, so much blood, and I didn't know what to do. By the time I got her down the mountain to a doctor, it was too late. Jonas, wait, let me finish. His voice was ragged. She died holding my hand. Her last words were protect him, not our son, just him. Like she already knew I'd fail, like she knew I'd give him away. You didn't fail, Rhea said fiercely. You kept him alive. You did what you had to do. I gave up my son to strangers. You gave him to someone who could care for him properly. That's not failure. That's love. Jonas looked at her with eyes full of pain. Is it? Or is it just cowardice dressed up in noble words? Rhea reached across the table and gripped his hand. Listen to me. You are not a coward. A coward would have let Agent Thorne take Liam today. A coward wouldn't be preparing to flee into the wilderness in the dead of winter to keep his son safe. You are the bravest man I know, Jonas Reddick. Don't you dare doubt that. For a moment, Jonas just stared at her. Then he turned his hand over so their palms met, his fingers closing around hers. His hand was huge and rough and warm, and Rhea felt something electric pass between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who'd been broken by life, who'd learned to survive alone, finding in each other something like strength. "Thank you," Jonas said softly. "For everything, for staying, for believing in me when you had no reason to." "I had every reason," Rhea said. "You gave me a home when no one else would. You treated me like a person, not like something to be used and thrown away. I won't forget that, ever." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, drawing strength from each other for the hard road ahead. Then Jonas released her hand and stood. "It's time," he said. "Full dark. We need to go." They woke Liam gently and dressed him in warm clothes, layer upon layer against the cold. The boy was confused and sleepy, but he didn't cry or complain, just held tight to his father's hand as they stepped out into the night. The moon was rising, painting the clearing in silver light. Jonas loaded their packs onto the big draft horse, then lifted Liam up onto the animal's broad back. Rhea climbed up behind the boy, wrapping her arms around him to keep him secure. Jonas took the horse's lead rope and started walking, heading not down toward the road but up, into the deep forest. Rhea looked back once at the cabin, at the home she'd lived in for less than a month but had come to think of as hers. Light glowed behind the windows. Jonas had left lamps burning to make it look like they were still there. A small deception that might buy them a few extra hours. Then the trees closed around them and the cabin disappeared from view, swallowed by darkness and distance. They walked through the night, Jonas setting a steady pace that ate up the miles. The forest was alive with sounds, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant cry of a coyote, the soft hoot of an owl hunting. Liam dozed against Rhea's chest, lulled by the horse's rocking gait and the warmth of her body. Rhea tried not to think about what lay ahead. The cold that would bite deeper with every foot of elevation they gained, the snow that would come soon, turning the mountains into a frozen wasteland, the food that would have to be rationed, the shelter that would have to be built from nothing, the constant vigilance against predators, both animal and human. Instead, she thought about the small boy sleeping in her arms, about Jonas walking ahead of them, never faltering, never looking back, about the choice she'd made to stay, to fight, to become part of something larger than herself. She thought about the workhouse, about standing on that auction platform while strangers bid pennies for her life, about the humiliation and despair that had marked her for so long. And she thought about Jonas's voice cutting through the crowd. "I'll take her." 3 words that had changed everything. As dawn broke cold and gray over the mountains, they were still climbing, still moving forward, still free. And for now, that was enough. The cold came down like a hammer 3 days into their flight. One moment they were climbing through stands of aspen already stripped bare by autumn winds, and the next the temperature plummeted and snow began to fall in thick, wet flakes that clung to everything they touched. Jonas didn't pause, didn't slow down. He just pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and kept walking, the horse's lead rope wrapped around his fist, his eyes fixed on the path only he could see. Rhea held Liam closer, trying to shelter him from the worst of the wind. The boy had stopped asking questions on the second day, had stopped chattering about the adventure they were on. Now he just clung to her in silence, his small body shivering despite the layers of clothing they'd wrapped him in. "Jonas," Rhea called out, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "We need to stop. Find shelter." "Not yet," Jonas called back. "There's a place, an old trapper's cabin, another mile up. We can make it." They made it, but barely. By the time the cabin came into view, a low structure built into the side of the mountain, half buried in snow and nearly invisible against the rock, Rhea had lost all feeling in her feet and hands. Jonas lifted Liam down from the horse and passed him to Rhea, then led the horse to a crude lean-to that served as a stable. The cabin door was frozen shut. Jonas had to throw his shoulder against it twice before it gave way, with a crack of ice and a groan of protesting wood. Inside, the air was only marginally warmer than outside, and the single room smelled of mice and old smoke. But it was shelter, and right now that was all that mattered. Jonas got a fire going in the stone fireplace while Rhea unwrapped Liam from his cocoon of blankets. The boy's lips were blue, his teeth chattering so hard he couldn't speak. She rubbed his hands and feet, trying to force warmth back into them, while Jonas melted snow for water and heated stones to wrap in cloth and tuck around Liam's body. "Is he all right?" Jonas asked, his voice tight with worry. "He will be, just cold." Rhea pulled Liam onto her lap and wrapped them both in the bearskin rug. "Come here, sweetheart. Let me warm you up." Liam burrowed against her, his small body gradually stopping its violent shaking as the fire grew and heat began to fill the small space. Jonas made a thin soup from their supplies, mostly broth with a few pieces of dried meat and some wild onions he'd gathered along the trail. It wasn't much, but it was hot, and they all drank it gratefully. That night they slept huddled together for warmth, all three of them on the cabin's single narrow platform bed. Liam between Jonas and Rhea, his small body finally relaxed and warm, his breathing soft and even. Rhea lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire pop in the hearth, and wondered how long they could survive like this. The snow fell for 2 days without stopping. They were trapped in the cabin, unable to move forward or back, burning through their wood supply and watching their food stores dwindle. Jonas went out only to care for the horse and to gather more firewood from the stack behind the cabin, wood left by some previous occupant, dried and ready to burn. Each time he opened the door, snow blew in and the temperature dropped, and Rhea would pull Liam closer and pray that Jonas would make it back safely. On the third day, the storm broke. The sun came out, weak and pale, and the world was buried under 3 feet of fresh snow that glittered like crushed diamonds. Jonas stood in the doorway, surveying the landscape with a grim expression. "We can't stay here," he said. "This cabin's not built for long-term winter habitation. No proper chimney, no storage for food, and if Thorne's men are still looking for us, they won't come up here," Rhea said. "Not in this weather. You'd be surprised what men will do when they're convinced God's on their side." Jonas turned back into the cabin. "We need to keep moving. There's another place, higher up. An old mining camp. The buildings are more solid, and there's game in that area. We can make it if we're careful." "How far?" 2 days, maybe 3 in this snow." Rhea looked at Liam, who was playing quietly by the fire with the wooden horse Jonas had carved. 2 more days of walking through deep snow, of cold that bit down to the bone, of pushing a small child beyond what any child should have to endure. But what choice did they have? Stay here and risk discovery, or keep moving and risk the mountain itself? "We'll need snowshoes," she said. Jonas nodded. "I'll make them. We've got rawhide and some green wood from the lean-to. Give me a few hours." While Jonas worked on the snowshoes, Rhea went through their supplies, taking inventory. They had enough food for perhaps 2 weeks if they were careful, less if the journey took longer than expected. After that, well, Jonas would have to hunt. And hunting in winter this high up was a gamble at best. She set aside a small portion of their dried fruit and gave it to Liam as a treat. The boy's eyes lit up when he saw the withered apple slices, and he ate them slowly, savoring each bite. It broke Rhea's heart to see how grateful he was for something so small. "Rhea?" Liam's voice was soft, hesitant. "Are the bad men still looking for us?" Rhea had been dreading this question. She sat down beside him and pulled him close. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. Why do they want me? How did you explain hatred to a child? How did you make a 3-year-old understand that there were people in the world who would hurt him simply for being born?" Rhea struggled for words that would be honest but not terrifying. "Some people are scared of things they don't understand," she said finally. "And when people are scared, sometimes they do mean things. But your papa and I, we're not going to let anyone hurt you, I promise." Liam thought about this, his small face serious. "Shima used to say that too, before she went away." Rhea's breath caught. "Shima?" "My other mama, the one with the pretty songs." Liam's eyes grew distant, remembering. "She had long black hair, and she smelled like sage. She used to hold me and sing in words I didn't understand, but then one day she went away and didn't come back." Rhea looked over at Jonas, who had stopped working on the snowshoes and was staring at his son with an expression of profound pain. Neither of them had known that Liam remembered his mother. They'd assumed he was too young, that the memories would have faded. "She loved you very much," Jonas said, his voice rough. She wanted to stay with you, but sometimes people can't stay, even when they want to. Did she go to heaven? Jonas hesitated, then nodded. Yes, she went to heaven. Will I see her again? Someday. When you're very old and you've lived a long, good life, but not for a very long time. Liam seemed satisfied with this answer. He went back to playing with his wooden horse, humming tunelessly under his breath. But Jonas sat frozen, the half-finished snowshoe in his hands, his face twisted with grief. Rhea went to him and put a hand on his shoulder. He's all right, she said quietly. He remembers her with love. That's a gift. A gift, Jonas repeated hollowly. Some gift. His mother's dead. He's being hunted like an animal, and I've dragged him up into these mountains where he might freeze to death or starve. What kind of father does that make me? The kind who loves his son enough to fight for him. The kind who won't give up, no matter how hard it gets. Rhea squeezed his shoulder. You're a good father, Jonas. Don't doubt that. Jonas looked up at her, and for a moment she saw past the mountain man exterior to the hurt, frightened man underneath. Then he nodded and went back to work on the snowshoes, his movements sharp and angry, working out his frustration and fear through his hands. They left at dawn the next morning. The snowshoes Jonas had fashioned were crude but functional, strapped to their feet with leather thongs. Liam rode on Jonas's back now, wrapped in blankets and tied in place with rope so he wouldn't fall. The horse carried their supplies, struggling through the deep snow but moving steadily under Jonas's guidance. The landscape had transformed into something alien and beautiful. Every tree was laden with snow, branches bending under the weight. The sun off the white expanse was blinding, and they had to shield their eyes as they walked. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their snowshoes and the labored breathing of the horse. They made slow progress. What might have taken a few hours in good weather stretched into an entire day of exhausting travel. By the time they stopped to make camp, Rhea's legs were shaking with fatigue and her lungs burned from the thin, cold air. Jonas built a fire in the shelter of a massive boulder, and they huddled around it, eating cold jerky and hard biscuits because cooking was impossible in the wind. Liam was too tired to eat much. He fell asleep sitting up, his head lolling against Jonas's chest. How much farther? Rhea asked. If we're lucky, we'll reach the mining camp by tomorrow evening. If we're not... Jonas didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They slept that night under the boulder, pressed close together for warmth, with the fire between them and the darkness. Rhea dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, the crack of ice, the rustle of wind, the distant howl of wolves. Beside her, Jonas didn't sleep at all. She could feel the tension in his body, could hear him shift position every few minutes, always alert, always watching. The next day was worse than the first. The terrain grew steeper, the snow deeper. They were above the tree line now, exposed to winds that cut like knives. Liam cried softly, his small face red with cold, but there was nothing they could do except keep moving. It was late afternoon when Jonas suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. Rhea nearly crashed into him. What is it? She asked. Smoke. Jonas pointed to the northwest, where a thin column of gray rose against the white sky. Someone's at the mining camp. Rhea's heart sank. Thorn? Could be. Or could be another trapper. Or miners who came back for the winter. Jonas's hand moved to the rifle strapped across his back. We need to find out who it is before we walk into a trap. What do we do? Jonas thought for a moment, then began unloading supplies from the horse. You and Liam stay here with the horse. I'll go ahead, scout the camp. If it's safe, I'll signal you. 3 shots in quick succession. If you hear anything else, or if I don't come back by dark, you take Liam and head back down the mountain. Understand? I'm not leaving without you. Rhea, I said I'm not leaving without you. Rhea's voice was fierce. We're in this together, all of us. You don't get to play the hero and sacrifice yourself. Jonas looked at her for a long moment. Then a ghost of a smile touched his lips. You're the stubbornest woman I ever met. Good. Then we understand each other. Jonas sighed, but there was something like admiration in his eyes. All right, but we do this smart. We leave the horse and most of the supplies here, hidden. Take only what we need to survive if we have to run. And if things go bad, you grab Liam and you run. Don't try to help me. Don't try to fight. Just run. Promise me. Rhea didn't want to promise, but she saw the desperation in Jonas's face and knew he wouldn't move forward without her word. I promise. They hid the horse and supplies in a sheltered spot behind a stand of wind-twisted pines, then set out toward the smoke. Jonas moved with the fluid silence of a predator, each step placed with care, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. Rhea followed as quietly as she could, carrying Liam bundled against her chest. The boy had stopped crying, seemed to sense that silence was crucial now. As they drew closer to the mining camp, details began to emerge through the blowing snow. Half a dozen buildings clustered around a central square, their roofs sagging under the weight of snow. The smoke was rising from the largest structure, probably the old bunkhouse, and there, in the square. Rhea grabbed Jonas's arm. There are horses, at least 5 of them. Jonas had seen them too. His face had gone hard, his jaw clenched. Too many for a single trapper. This is Thorn. Has to be. How did they find us? They didn't. This is just bad luck. They're using the camp as a base while they search the area. But now we can't go there. We'll have to find somewhere else. Where? We're almost out of food. The horse can't carry us much farther. And Liam... Rhea looked down at the small boy in her arms, at his pale face and chapped lips. He needs shelter, Jonas. Real shelter. He won't last another week out here. I know. The words came out like they were being torn from him. God help me. I know. They stood there in the wind and snow, 2 people and a child with nowhere left to run, watching smoke rise from the only shelter for miles. Rhea felt despair settle over her like a heavy cloak. They'd come so far, fought so hard. And for what? To freeze to death within sight of salvation? Then Liam stirred in her arms and looked up at his father with those huge, dark eyes. Papa, are we going home now? Jonas looked at his son, and something in his face changed. The despair hardened into determination, the defeat transformed into resolve. No, son, we're not going home. But we're not giving up either. Come on. He turned and started back toward where they'd left the horse, moving fast now. Rhea hurried after him, confused. What are you doing? Something I should have done from the start. I'm going to end this. Jonas? They want Liam? Fine. They can have a conversation with me about it. Face to face, man to man. Jonas's voice was cold as the wind. I'm done running. I'm done hiding. I'm going to walk into that camp and I'm going to tell Thorn exactly what I think of his purity laws and his moral crusade. And if he still wants to take my son after that, he'll have to go through me. That's suicide, Rhea said flatly. You saw how many men he has. I don't care. Well, I do. Rhea planted herself in front of him, forcing him to stop. And so does Liam. You think he wants to watch his father die? You think that's what his mother would have wanted? Jonas flinched like she'd struck him. What else can I do? We can't run anymore. We can't hide. Sooner or later they'll find us, and when they do, then we need a different plan. Rhea's mind was racing, pieces clicking together. What if we didn't run or fight? What if we went to them but on our terms? What if we had proof that what they're doing is wrong? What kind of proof? Liam's baptismal certificate. You said his mother had him baptized, made him Christian in the eyes of the law. If we could show that to a judge, to someone with real authority, Thorn wouldn't care. Neither would most judges in this territory. But some might, and we need to find those people, not hide from them. Rhea could see the plan taking shape now, could feel it solidifying. There's a fort north of here, Fort Valor. It's a federal installation, which means federal law, not territorial. If we could get there, if we could find an officer willing to listen, it's at least 50 miles from here, through mountains, in winter. Can we make it? Jonas looked at her, then at Liam, then back at the smoke rising from the mining camp. She could see him weighing the options, calculating odds. Finally, he nodded slowly. Maybe, if the weather holds, if we're lucky. Then that's what we do. We go to Fort Valor. We find someone who still believes in justice. Rhea shifted Liam in her arms. But first we need supplies, and there's only one place to get them. Jonas's eyes widened. You want to steal from Thorn? I want to take what we need to survive. He's got food, blankets, probably ammunition. He's got horses that aren't half dead from climbing mountains. And right now, he's sitting in that warm building thinking he's won, that we're somewhere out here freezing to death. Rhea smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Let's prove him wrong. For a moment, Jonas just stared at her. Then he started to laugh, a rough, surprised sound that died quickly in the cold air. You're not just stubborn, you're crazy. Probably. Do you have a better idea? He thought about it, then shook his head. No, God help us, I don't. They waited until full dark, huddled behind the pines with Liam sleeping between them. The cold was brutal, and Rhea had to keep moving her fingers and toes to maintain feeling. Jonas checked his rifle 3 times, loaded and reloaded his pistol, his face set in grim lines. When the last light faded from the sky and the camp below was quiet, except for the glow of firelight from the bunkhouse windows, they moved. Jonas went first, low and fast, using the snow-covered debris of the old mining operation as cover. Rhea followed with Liam, moving as quietly as she could, her heart hammering so hard she was sure someone would hear it. The horses were kept in a makeshift corral on the east side of the camp. Jonas approached them slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice, calming them before they could whinny and give away their presence. He selected 2, a sturdy roan and a gray mare, and led them out of the corral with practiced ease. While Jonas handled the horses, Rhea moved toward a smaller building that looked like it might be a supply shed. The door wasn't locked. Who would steal supplies this far into the wilderness? She slipped inside and felt her way through the darkness, her hands finding sacks of flour and beans, strips of dried meat, blankets that smelled of tobacco and sweat but would keep them warm. She was loading the last of the supplies into a sack when she heard voices. Men's voices coming from the bunkhouse. The door opened, spilling yellow light across the snow, and 2 figures emerged. Rhea froze, pressed against the wall of the shed, barely breathing. "Check the horses one more time," one of the men was saying. It was Willis, the younger deputy. "Thorne's convinced Reddick is going to try something." "Let him try," the other man, Carter, replied. "We got 6 guns and he's got 1. He'd have to be crazy to come at us head on." "Maybe he is crazy. They say he went half mad in the mountains. They say—" Willis stopped talking, stopped walking. He was looking directly at the corral, where 2 horses were conspicuously missing. "Carter," he said slowly, "where's the roan?" Carter looked, swore. Both men started running toward the corral, shouting. The bunkhouse door flew open and more men poured out, Agent Thorne's voice rising above the confusion, demanding to know what was happening. Rhea didn't wait to hear more. She grabbed the supply sack and ran, slipping and sliding in the snow, making for the trees where Jonas waited with the horses. Behind her, she could hear chaos erupting, men shouting, someone yelling to grab rifles, Thorne's voice cutting through it all like a whip crack. Jonas saw her coming and swung onto the roan in one fluid motion. He leaned down and hauled Rhea up behind him with one arm, the strength of him astonishing. She barely had time to grab hold of his coat before he kicked the horse into motion, the gray mare following on a lead rope. Shots rang out behind them. A bullet whined past Rhea's ear, so close she felt the air displacement. Another kicked up snow inches from the roan's hooves. But Jonas didn't slow down, just urged the horse faster, weaving between trees, using the terrain to shield them from the shooters. They rode hard for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, putting distance between themselves and the mining camp. Finally, Jonas slowed the horses to a walk and circled back to where they'd left their original mount and the rest of their supplies. Liam woke as they were transferring gear between horses, his eyes wide with fear. "Papa, what's happening? I heard loud noises." "Everything's all right now," Jonas said, though his voice was tight with adrenaline. "We're just leaving this place, that's all." "Were those the bad men?" "Yes, but we got away. We're safe now." It was a lie, and they all knew it. They weren't safe. Wouldn't be safe until they reached Fort Valor, if they reached it at all. But it was the lie Liam needed to hear, so that's what Jonas told him. They rode through the night, pushing north, staying off any established trails. The moon was bright enough to see by, and Jonas seemed to know these mountains by instinct, guiding them through passes and along ridges that would have been invisible to anyone else. Rhea rode behind Jonas on the roan, Liam bundled between them, and tried not to think about how many things could still go wrong. The horses could break a leg in the dark. They could get lost and wander in circles until they died of exposure. Thorn and his men could track them down before they reached the fort. But they could also make it. They could survive this. They could win. She tightened her arms around Jonas and Liam and leaned her forehead against Jonas's broad back, drawing strength from his solidity, from the steady way he kept moving forward, no matter what. "Thank you," Jonas said suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "For what you did back there, for not giving up." "I told you," Rhea said. "We're in this together." Still, most people would have run, would have taken the first chance to get away from all this trouble. "I'm not most people." "No," Jonas agreed. "You're not. You're—" He paused, struggling with words. "You're the strongest person I know," Rhea called her, "and I'm grateful you're here." Rhea felt warmth bloom in her chest, despite the cold, despite the danger, despite everything. "So am I," she whispered. They rode on through the silver darkness, three souls bound together by circumstance and choice, heading toward an uncertain future but facing it together. Behind them, the mining camp fell away into memory and distance. Ahead, somewhere beyond the mountains, lay Fort Valor and the hope of justice. And between then and now stretched mile after mile of frozen wilderness, of danger and hardship and cold that would test them to their very limits. But they were still moving, still fighting, still free, and as long as that remained true, there was hope. The journey to Fort Valor took 6 days that felt like 6 lifetimes. They traveled through countries so remote that Rhea sometimes wondered if they'd left the civilized world entirely and entered some primordial realm where humans had never set foot. The mountains rose around them like the ribs of some ancient beast, and the silence was so profound it seemed to have weight and texture. On the 3rd day, they ran out of food. Jonas shot a rabbit that evening, and they roasted it over a small fire, dividing the meager meat 3 ways. Liam ate his portion without complaint, though Rhea could see hunger still haunting his eyes afterward. She gave him half of her share when Jonas wasn't looking, and pretended she was full when he questioned her. That night, huddled together under the stars, Jonas told stories to keep Liam's mind off his empty stomach. Tales of frontier heroes and clever animals, of impossible journeys and miraculous survivals. His voice was deep and steady, weaving words into warmth, and Liam listened with rapt attention until his eyes grew heavy and he drifted off to sleep. "You're good with him," Rhea said quietly, once the boy was breathing soft and even between them. "I'm trying to be. I missed so much, 3 years of his life. I don't even know what he likes, what scares him, what makes him laugh." Jonas stared up at the stars. "Sometimes I look at him and I can't believe he's mine, that I helped make something so perfect. He knows you love him. That's what matters. Is it enough, though? Love doesn't keep you warm, doesn't fill your belly." Jonas's voice was raw with self-recrimination. "I'm dragging him through hell because I'm too stubborn to let him go." "You're protecting him from men who would destroy him. That's not stubborn. That's love." Rhea reached across Liam's sleeping form and found Jonas's hand in the darkness. "Don't doubt yourself now. We're almost there. Are we? For all I know, we're lost. Could be circling back toward Ash Hollow for all the sense I can make of these mountains at night." "You're not lost. I've seen the way you read the stars, the way you know every ridge and valley. You could navigate these mountains blindfolded." Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then he squeezed her hand, once, quick and hard, before letting go. "Thank you for believing in me. I'm not sure I deserve it, but thank you." Rhea wanted to tell him that he deserved everything good in the world, that he was the best man she'd ever known, that somewhere along this desperate journey she'd started to care for him in ways that terrified and exhilarated her. But the words stuck in her throat, too big and frightening to release into the cold night air. So instead she just said, "Get some sleep. I'll take first watch." On the 5th day they saw signs of pursuit. Horse tracks in the snow, too fresh to be anyone's but Thorn's men. Jonas studied them with a grim expression, then urged their horses faster, pushing them hard despite the treacherous terrain. "How close are they?" Rhea asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Close enough, maybe half a day behind us." Jonas's jaw was set. "They're good trackers, better than I expected." Can we outrun them? Not with Liam. Not without running the horses into the ground. He was silent for a moment, thinking. But we don't have to outrun them. We just have to reach the fort first. Once we're on federal land, Thorne's warrant means nothing. How much farther? If I'm right about where we are, we should see the fort by tomorrow afternoon, but that's a big if. That night they didn't risk a fire. They ate snow for water and huddled together for warmth, taking turns staying awake to watch their back trail. Ria's watch came in the darkest hours before dawn, and she sat with Jonas's rifle across her knees, staring into the darkness and trying not to imagine Thorne and his men creeping closer with every passing minute. Liam whimpered in his sleep, and Ria reached out to stroke his hair, soothing him back into deeper rest. The boy was so small, so fragile. How could anyone look at him and see a threat? How could anyone believe that this child, who liked wooden horses and fairy tales and his father's stories, was an abomination that needed to be removed from society? The hatred made no sense to her. But then, hatred rarely did. When dawn came gray and cold, they saddled the horses and rode on. The terrain began to change, becoming less vertical, the mountains giving way to rolling foothills. And then, as the sun reached its zenith, Jonas reined in his horse and pointed. "There," he said, and Ria followed his gaze. In the valley below, she could see the ordered geometry of human construction, walls and buildings arranged in neat squares, smoke rising from chimneys, the American flag snapping in the wind. Fort Valor. Relief hit her so hard she felt dizzy. They'd made it. Against all odds, through cold and hunger and pursuit, they'd actually made it. Thank God, she breathed. But Jonas didn't look relieved. His face was troubled as he studied the fort. Something's not right. What do you mean? Look at the gate. It's open. Middle of winter, middle of the day, and they've got their gate standing wide open like they're expecting visitors. He frowned. That's not standard military practice. Maybe they're just being welcoming. Or maybe Thorne sent word ahead. Maybe he's got friends here. Jonas's hand moved to his rifle. We need to be careful how we approach this. They rode down into the valley slowly, watching for any sign of trouble. As they got closer, Ria could see soldiers moving about their duties, could hear the sounds of normal garrison life. Men drilling, horses being tended, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer. Everything looked ordinary, peaceful even. But Jonas remained tense, alert for danger. They were 50 yards from the gate when a voice called out, "Hold there! State your business." A soldier had appeared on the wall, young, maybe 20, with corporal's stripes on his sleeve. He had a rifle, but it wasn't pointed at them. Yet. "We need to see the commanding officer," Jonas called back. "It's urgent." "What's the nature of your business?" "That's between us and the colonel." The corporal studied them. 3 people on 2 horses, all of them looking ragged and half frozen. "You're a long way from anywhere. Where'd you come from?" "Ash Hollow originally, but we've been in the mountains for the better part of a week." "In this weather?" The corporal's eyebrows rose. "Must be important business." "It is." The corporal conferred with someone below the wall, then called down, "All right, come on in, but weapons stay with me until the colonel says otherwise." Jonas hesitated, and Ria could see the calculation in his eyes. Giving up his rifle meant vulnerability, but refusing meant they wouldn't get inside, wouldn't get the help they needed. "Jonas," she said quietly, "we have to trust someone eventually." He looked at her, then at Liam, then back at the fort. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but if this goes wrong—" "It won't," Ria said with more confidence than she felt. They rode through the gate into the fort's courtyard. The corporal came down to meet them, along with 2 privates. Jonas handed over his rifle and pistol with obvious reluctance, and the corporal gave him a receipt, proper procedure, which eased some of Ria's worry. If they were following regulations, maybe this was legitimate after all. "Colonel Mackenzie's office is that way," the corporal said, pointing to a building on the north side of the courtyard. "He should be in. Tell the clerk I sent you." They walked across the courtyard, Jonas carrying Liam now because the boy was too tired to walk. Soldiers glanced at them curiously but didn't interfere. Ria felt exposed, vulnerable without Jonas's guns, but she kept her head high and her expression calm. The colonel's office was warm and smelled of pipe tobacco and paper. A clerk sat at a desk in the outer room, an older man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up as they entered. "Help you folks?" "We need to see Colonel Mackenzie," Jonas said. "The corporal at the gate sent us." The clerk studied them with shrewd eyes. "What's this regarding?" "It's a legal matter, a federal matter." "The colonel's very busy. Please." Rhea stepped forward, and something in her voice made the clerk pause. "We've traveled 6 days through the mountains to get here. A child's life is at stake. If the colonel truly can't see us, we'll wait. But please, at least ask him." The clerk looked at her for a long moment, then at Liam sleeping against Jonas's shoulder. Something in his expression softened. "Wait here." He disappeared through an inner door. Rhea could hear low voices, though she couldn't make out the words. Then the door opened again and the clerk beckoned them forward. "Colonel will see you. 5 minutes." The inner office was larger, with maps on the walls and a desk piled with papers. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by years of frontier service. His uniform was crisp, his bearing military straight, but his eyes were kind. "I'm Colonel Mackenzie," he said, rising to shake Jonas's free hand. "Please sit. Your boy looks exhausted." Jonas settled into one of the chairs, Liam still cradled against him. Rhea took the other chair, suddenly aware of how filthy they all were, how wild they must look. "Now then," Mackenzie said, returning to his seat, "my clerk says you've got a legal matter. What seems to be the problem?" Jonas took a breath, and Rhea could see him gathering his thoughts, deciding how to present their case. "My name is Jonas Reddick. This is my son, Liam, and we're here because a man named Cyrus Thorne is trying to take my boy away from me based on a territorial law that I believe violates federal jurisdiction." Mackenzie's expression grew serious. "Go on." "Liam's mother was Navajo. She died when he was born. Under normal circumstances, that wouldn't matter. A man has a right to raise his own son. But there's this new law, the Purity Protection Act, that says mixed-blood children are a threat to white society and can be removed from their families by appointed agents." Jonas's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "Thorne is one of those agents? He tracked us to my cabin, tried to take Liam. When I refused, he came after us with armed men. We've been running for over a week." Mackenzie leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "I've heard of this law. It's caused considerable controversy. But Mr. Reddick, if it's territorial law, it violates the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, Jonas interrupted. That treaty guarantees the rights of Native peoples and their descendants. The federal government has jurisdiction over Indian affairs, not the territories. Thorne has no legal authority to take my son." "That's a complex legal argument. I'm not sure. I have documentation." Jonas carefully reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the folded baptismal certificate, along with papers Rhea hadn't known he carried. "Liam's baptismal certificate, proving he's Christian. My marriage certificate to his mother. We married in a civil ceremony 2 weeks before she died, which makes him legitimate under federal law. And a copy of the treaty I mentioned." He spread the papers on Mackenzie's desk. The colonel picked them up one by one, reading carefully. His expression was unreadable. "Where did you get these?" he asked finally. "The baptismal certificate and marriage license are genuine, recorded at the mission in Silver Creek. The treaty copy I got from a lawyer in Denver 3 years ago, when I first understood what Liam's heritage might mean for him." Mackenzie studied the papers for a long moment. Then he looked up at Jonas with new respect. "You've been planning for this." "I've been dreading this," Jonas corrected. "But yes, I prepared as best I could." "Mr. Reddick, I'll be honest with you. Even with these documents, this is complicated. The territorial courts might not recognize." There was a commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of horses. Through the window, Rhea could see riders entering the courtyard. 5 of them, led by a thin man in a black suit. Thorne. Jonas saw them too. His face went pale, then hard as stone. "That's him. That's the man who's been hunting my son." Mackenzie stood and moved to the window. He watched for a moment, then turned back to them with a grave expression. "Stay here. Don't leave this office, no matter what happens. Understood?" "Colonel," I said, "stay here. That's an order." Mackenzie's voice had steel in it. He strode out of the office, calling for his clerk to fetch the sergeant of the guard. Rhea moved to the window and watched as Thorne dismounted in the courtyard. Even from here, she could see the self-righteous fury in his bearing. He spotted Mackenzie approaching and started toward him, his voice carrying across the space. "Colonel Mackenzie, I'm Agent Cyrus Thorne, operating under the authority of the territorial governor. I'm pursuing a fugitive, a man named Jonas Reddick, who's harboring a child in violation of the Purity Protection Act. I have reason to believe he came here." Mackenzie's reply was too quiet to hear, but his body language was clear, authoritative, unyielding. Thorne's face reddened. He gestured angrily, pulled papers from his coat. The two men argued, their voices rising. "He's not going to let Thorne in," Jonas said, and Rhea heard desperate hope in his voice. "He's actually standing up to him." But then more riders appeared at the gate. Soldiers, but not from the fort. These wore territorial militia uniforms, and there were at least a dozen of them. Their leader rode straight to Thorne and Mackenzie, dismounting with the confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. "That's trouble," Jonas breathed. "That's Major Drummond. He's territorial militia, and he's got a reputation for being a Thorne supporter." Rhea watched as the three men conferred. Mackenzie's posture was stiff, defensive. Thorne looked triumphant, and Drummond looked like a man who knew he had the upper hand. The office door burst open. The clerk stood there, his face pale. "Mr. Reddick, you need to go. Now. Out the back. The colonel says—" But it was too late. Thorne was already striding toward the building, Drummond and 4 militia soldiers behind him. Mackenzie was arguing, but Drummond waved him off with barely concealed contempt. Jonas stood, pulling Liam close. The boy woke, confused and frightened. "Papa?" "It's all right," Jonas said, but his eyes said otherwise. He looked at Rhea. "Stay behind me." The door slammed open. Thorne stood there, breathing hard, his eyes blazing with zealous fury. "Jonas Reddick, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, theft of government property, and harboring a fugitive from territorial law." "He's not a fugitive. He's my son." "He's an abomination." Thorne's voice was vicious. "And you're a race traitor who deserves to hang." "Now wait just a minute." Mackenzie had pushed into the office behind Thorne. "This is a federal installation. You don't have authority here." "Actually, he does." Drummond appeared in the doorway, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "The territorial governor has granted militia jurisdiction over all matters pertaining to the Purity Protection Act, including on federal land. I have the paperwork if you'd like to see it, Colonel." Mackenzie's face went red. "That's unconstitutional. The federal government has sole jurisdiction over—" "Take it up with your superiors in Washington," Drummond said coldly. "In the meantime, we're taking Reddick and the boy into custody." 2 militia soldiers moved forward. Jonas backed up until he hit the wall, Liam clutched in his arms. "Don't touch him." "Papa, I'm scared," Liam whimpered. "I know, son. I know. Just hold tight to me." Rhea stepped in front of Jonas, her hands spread wide. "Please. He's just a child. He hasn't done anything wrong." "Move aside, woman," Thorne snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me. I'm part of this family. You're an accessory to a crime, is what you are. Now move or I'll have you arrested too." The soldiers reached for Rhea. She tried to resist, but they were stronger. They grabbed her arms and hauled her aside, and she fought them, screaming, scratching, doing anything she could to break free. "No!" Jonas roared. He tried to lunge forward to help Rhea, but more soldiers swarmed him. They tore Liam from his arms despite the boy's terrified screams, despite Jonas fighting like a cornered bear, landing blows that sent men staggering back. But there were too many of them. They subdued Jonas with rifle butts and fists, beating him down until he collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. They dragged Liam away, the boy crying, reaching for his father. "Papa, Papa, help me!" "Let him go!" Jonas's voice was raw, agonized. "Please, God, let him go!" But they didn't let him go. They carried Liam out of the office, the boy's screams echoing across the courtyard. Thorne followed, his face alight with righteous satisfaction. Rhea was still struggling against the soldiers holding her. Through her tears, she saw Mackenzie standing helpless, his face twisted with fury and shame. Saw Jonas on his knees, held down by 3 men, blood and tears mixing on his face as he watched his son being taken away. "You bastards!" Jonas choked out. "You goddamn bastards!" Drummond looked down at him with cold disdain. "You brought this on yourself, Reddick. Should have given up the boy when you had the chance. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." He nodded to his men. "Lock him up. 24 hours in the stockade, then we transport him back to Ash Hollow for trial." They hauled Jonas to his feet and dragged him from the office. As he passed Rhea, their eyes met for one terrible moment. She saw despair there and defeat, and something that might have been an apology. Then he was gone, and Rhea was released, left standing in Mackenzie's office with her arms aching and her heart shattered into pieces. "I'm sorry," Mackenzie said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I tried, but Drummond, he's got connections all the way to the territorial capital. My hands are tied." Rhea didn't answer. She was staring at the papers still spread across Mackenzie's desk. Liam's baptismal certificate, the marriage license, the treaty copy. All that preparation, all that hope, and it hadn't mattered. Thorne had taken Liam anyway. She thought about the boy's screams, about Jonas's broken expression, about the absolute certainty that they'd lost, that evil had won. And then, slowly, she thought about something else. "Colonel," she said quietly, "where is Thorne taking Liam?" "I don't know. Back to territorial authority, I assume. There are facilities. Orphanages? Workhouses?" Rhea's voice was bitter. "I grew up in one of those places, Colonel. I know what they're like. That boy won't survive a month. I'm sorry, I truly am, but there's nothing I can do." Rhea looked at him, at this good man whose hands were tied by politics and jurisdiction. Then she looked at the papers on the desk, at the proof of Liam's legitimacy and rights. "Maybe you can't do anything," she said, "but I can." Mackenzie frowned. "Miss, where do they keep prisoners being transported? Which building?" "The stockade is on the south wall, but you can't." Rhea was already moving toward the door. "Thank you for trying to help us, Colonel. You're a good man, but sometimes good men aren't enough. Sometimes it takes someone with nothing left to lose." She walked out into the courtyard, into the cold afternoon light, and looked around with new eyes. The fort was settling back into routine, soldiers returning to their duties, the excitement of the confrontation fading. But Rhea's mind was racing, planning, calculating odds that were impossibly long, but maybe, just maybe, not quite impossible. Jonas had tried to fight within the system, had gathered documentation and sought legal remedies, and the system had failed him, failed Liam, failed everything decent and right. So now it was time to try something else. Rhea Calder had spent most of her life being invisible, being overlooked, being dismissed as too big, too plain, too nothing. She'd stood on an auction platform while people bid pennies for her life, and she'd survived that humiliation by becoming small and quiet and unobtrusive. But she wasn't that person anymore. Somewhere on that desperate flight through the mountains, she'd become someone else, someone who fought, someone who protected what mattered, someone who refused to accept that cruelty and hatred would always win. She watched Thorne and his men prepare to leave, loading their horses with supplies for the journey back to Ash Hollow. She saw Liam in one of the militia wagons, huddled under a blanket, his small face red and swollen from crying. She saw soldiers guarding Jonas in the stockade, their rifles ready, their postures alert. And she began to plan. Because this wasn't over. Not while she still had breath in her body. Not while Jonas still lived. Not while that little boy needed someone to fight for him. The battle had been lost. But the war was just beginning. And Rhea Calder had learned something important over the past weeks, something she'd never fully understood before. She had learned that she was strong, that she was brave, that she was capable of things she'd never imagined. And she had learned that love, real love, the kind that protects and sacrifices and endures, was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. So she would fight. She would find a way. Or she would die trying. Rhea spent the rest of that afternoon watching, learning the rhythms of the fort. She moved through the courtyard like a ghost, unnoticed by soldiers who had more important things to occupy their attention. She noted which guards were vigilant and which were lazy, when shifts changed, where blind spots existed in the fort's defenses. Most importantly, she watched Thorne's camp. The agent and his men had set up in a corner of the fort, separate from the regular military quarters. They'd be leaving at dawn, Rhea overheard one of the militia soldiers say, taking the boy to a territorial facility in Dry Needle, 3 days' ride south. After that, Liam would disappear into the system, just another nameless child in an institution that ground up the weak and unwanted, unless someone stopped them. As evening fell, Rhea approached the stockade where Jonas was being held. The corporal on duty, the same young man from the gate, looked uncomfortable when he saw her. "Ma'am, I can't let you see the prisoner. Major Drummond's orders." "I understand. I just want to know if he's all right. They beat him pretty badly." The corporal shifted his weight. "He's got some bruises, nothing broken. Fort doctor checked him over. He'll be fine for transport tomorrow." "Transport to where? To stand trial for the crime of protecting his own son?" "Ma'am, I don't make the laws. I just follow orders," Rhea finished bitterly. "I know. Everyone's just following orders. That's how injustice happens. Good people doing nothing because someone told them not to." The corporal's face flushed. "That's not fair. Colonel Mackenzie tried to help. We all saw it. But when the militia came with their jurisdiction orders—" "I know." Rhea softened her tone. "I'm not blaming you. But that boy in Thorne's wagon, he's 3 years old. He calls his father Papa, and he's terrified, and he doesn't understand why everyone's being so cruel. Doesn't that bother you at all?" The corporal looked away. "Of course it bothers me. I got a nephew about that age, sweet kid. But what am I supposed to do? Disobey direct orders? Get court-martialed?" "No," Rhea said quietly. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I just wanted you to know what you're protecting, to understand what Thorne really is." She walked away before he could respond, back toward the main courtyard. Night was falling properly now, the temperature dropping with the sun. Soldiers hurried to finish their duties and get inside where it was warm. Rhea had no place to go, no warm quarters waiting for her. She was nobody here, not a prisoner, but not a guest either, just a woman who'd arrived with a fugitive and had nowhere else to be. She found a spot in the shadow of the quartermaster's building and huddled there, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. From here, she could see both the stockade and Thorne's camp, could see the wagon where Liam was being held, guarded by 2 militia soldiers who looked bored and cold. Hours passed. The fort settled into nighttime routine. Most of the soldiers retired to their barracks. The guards on the walls continued their patrols, their breath steaming in the frigid air. The campfires burned low, and Rhea waited. She'd almost dozed off when she heard it. A woman's voice, speaking urgently in a language Rhea didn't understand. She jerked fully awake and peered around the corner of the building. A figure was approaching Thorne's camp, small, moving with purpose despite the late hour. As the person passed through a pool of lamplight, Rhea caught a glimpse of dark hair, brown skin, and eyes that blazed with determination. The woman walked straight to the wagon where Liam was being held. The guards stood up, raising their rifles. "Hold it right there," one of them said. "State your business." "I've come for my son," the woman said, and though her English was accented, her words were clear and strong. Rhea's breath caught. She knew that voice, or rather, she knew who it had to be. Nyla, Liam's mother, the woman Jonas had said died in childbirth, but she was standing right there, very much alive. Thorne emerged from his tent, pulling on his coat. "What's this commotion?" "This woman claims the boy in the wagon is her son," the guard said. Thorne studied the newcomer with cold eyes. "Is that so? And who might you be?" "My name is Nyla. I am Diné, Navajo. 3 years ago, I gave birth to a son. His father took him from me, said he would raise him. But now I hear that white men are taking mixed-blood children, and I have come to claim what is mine." Thorne's expression shifted from suspicion to something like satisfaction. "You're saying Jonas Reddick stole your child?" "He took my son when I was too weak to stop him. I have been searching for years. When I heard about a man named Reddick with a dark-skinned boy—" "This is very interesting." Thorne circled her like a predator. "Because under territorial law, if you're the mother and you want custody, that changes things. The Purity Protection Act allows for children to be returned to their native communities if those communities will accept them." "I will take him." My people will accept him. Wait, one of the militia soldiers interrupted. Reddick said the mother died in childbirth. That's what's in the documents. Nyla's eyes flashed. He told everyone I was dead because it was easier than admitting he stole a child from its mother. He is a liar and a thief. Rhea's mind raced. Was this possible? Had Jonas lied about Nyla's death? But no, she'd seen the grief in his face when he talked about her, the way he'd mourned. Unless Nyla was lying. Unless she was playing some deeper game. Thorn was still circling the woman. If what you say is true, I'll need proof. Documentation. Something that shows you're who you claim to be. I have this. Nyla pulled something from beneath her cloak, a small piece of cloth, intricately woven. This is Liam's baby blanket. I made it when I carried him. See the pattern? It tells the story of his clan, his people. Only his mother would have this. Thorn took the blanket and examined it. Rhea couldn't tell if he believed Nyla or not, but she could see him calculating, weighing options. All right, he said finally. You can see the boy, but I make no promises about custody. That will be decided by a territorial judge. I do not trust your judges, but I will see my son. Thorn nodded to the guards, and they opened the wagon. Inside, Liam was awake, curled in the corner with his arms wrapped around his knees. When he saw Nyla, his eyes went wide. Shima? He whispered. Nyla's composure cracked. She scrambled into the wagon and pulled Liam into her arms, speaking rapidly in Navajo, her voice breaking with emotion. The boy clung to her, crying, and she held him tight, rocking him back and forth. Rhea watched from her hiding place, her heart hammering. This changed everything. If Nyla was really alive, if she really wanted Liam, did Jonas even have a legal claim anymore? And more importantly, what did this mean for Liam's safety? Thorn let them have a few minutes together, then cleared his throat. That's enough. The boy needs to sleep. I will stay with him, Nyla said, not releasing Liam. That's not... I will stay with him, she repeated, and there was steel beneath her words. You have taken him from his father. You will not take him from his mother again. Thorn considered this, then shrugged. Fine, but you don't leave the wagon. Guards will be posted all night. I do not run. I have nothing to fear from your white man's justice. Nyla settled into the wagon with Liam still wrapped in her arms. The guards resumed their posts, looking uncertain about this new development. Thorn stood watching for a moment longer, then returned to his tent. Rhea waited until the camp had quieted again, then moved carefully toward the stockade. She had to tell Jonas what had happened, had to know if he'd known Nyla was alive. But as she approached, the corporal on duty stepped out to block her path. I said you can't see the prisoner. Please, something's happened. He needs to know. What's happened? Rhea hesitated. Could she trust this young soldier? Then she saw something in his face, a decent man struggling with an indecent situation. A man who was bothered by what was happening to Liam, who had a nephew the same age. Liam's mother is here, she said quietly. The woman Jonas said died in childbirth. She's alive, and she's claiming Thorn stole the boy from her. The corporal's eyes widened. Is she telling the truth? I don't know, but Jonas deserves to know she's here. The corporal looked around, making sure no one was watching. Then he made a decision. 2 minutes, that's all I can give you. And if anyone asks, I left my post to relieve myself. Thank you. He unlocked the stockade door and let Rhea slip inside. Jonas was sitting on a narrow cot, his face bruised and swollen, his hands chained to the wall. When he saw Rhea, he struggled to stand. Rhea, are you all right? Did they hurt you? I'm fine. Jonas, listen to me. We don't have much time. She knelt beside him, took his chained hands in hers. Nyla is here. She's alive. Jonas went completely still. What? She's at Thorn's camp. She says you stole Liam from her, that you told everyone she was dead. Is it true? Is she really Liam's mother? Jonas's voice was strangled. She was dead. I saw her die. I held her while she bled out. There was so much blood, Rhea. She couldn't have survived. Then who is this woman? I don't know. But it's not Nyla. It can't be. His eyes were wild with confusion and fear. Unless God, unless I was wrong, unless she didn't die, unless she's been alive all this time and I… Jonas, focus. Whoever she is, she has Liam right now. Thorn is letting her stay with him. They're talking about custody, about returning Liam to his native community. No. Jonas surged against his chains. I don't care who she is. I don't care if she really is Nyla somehow survived. Liam is my son. I raised him. I protected him. She can't just appear after 3 years and take him. I don't think she's trying to take him, Rhea said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. I think she's trying to save him. Jonas stopped struggling. What do you mean? Think about it. Thorn can't take a child away from its mother, especially if the mother is native and willing to keep him. Under the treaties, that's a federal issue, not territorial. If Nyla, or whoever she is, claims Liam, she might be able to get him away from Thorn legally, and once he's away, we can figure out the rest later, Jonas finished. Hope and fear warred on his face. But how do we know we can trust her? What if she really does take him and disappear? We don't know. But right now, she's the best chance Liam has. They stared at each other in the dim light of the stockade, and Rhea saw Jonas make the hardest decision a parent could make, to trust a stranger with his child's life because there was no other choice. All right, he said hoarsely. What do we do? I need to talk to her. Find out who she really is and what she's planning, and we need to get you out of here. Rhea, they're not going to just let me walk out. I know, but there's someone who might help. She squeezed his hands. Trust me, I'll figure this out. I do trust you, more than anyone. Jonas pulled their joined hands to his chest. Whatever happens, thank you. For everything. For standing by us when you had every reason to walk away. I'm not walking away. Not now, not ever. Rhea leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. We're going to get through this. All of us. Together. The corporal appeared at the door. Time's up, ma'am. Rhea released Jonas's hands and stood. As she left the stockade, she felt his eyes on her back, felt the weight of his faith in her. She couldn't let him down. Couldn't let Liam down. She made her way across the courtyard to the building she'd been watching all evening, Colonel Mackenzie's quarters. A light still burned in his window. She knocked, and after a moment the door opened. Mackenzie stood there in his shirt sleeves, looking tired and older than he had that afternoon. Miss Calder, it's late. I know, sir, but I need your help. Mackenzie sighed and stepped aside to let her in. His quarters were Spartan but comfortable, with a desk covered in papers and a bottle of whiskey sitting open beside an empty glass. I can't help you, he said without preamble. I already tried. Drummond has legal authority here, whether I like it or not. What if Thorne's authority wasn't valid? What if there was another legal claim to the boy? Mackenzie looked at her sharply. What are you talking about? Rhea told him about Nyla's appearance, about her claim to be Liam's mother. As she spoke, she saw Mackenzie's expression shift from skepticism to interest. If the mother is alive and wants custody, that changes the legal landscape considerably, he said slowly. Especially if she's willing to take the boy back to her people. The federal government has treaties that protect native family structures. Thorne's territorial authority wouldn't override that. Exactly. But we need to verify who she is. And we need to do it before Thorne leaves at dawn. Mackenzie poured himself a measure of whiskey and drank it in one swallow. What are you proposing? A hearing. Tonight. You have the authority to convene one, don't you? To settle disputes that fall under federal jurisdiction. Technically, yes, but Drummond can go to hell, Rhea said fiercely. You said yourself that Thorne's actions troubled you. Here's your chance to do something about it. Demand a hearing to establish custody. Bring in Jonas, bring in Nyla, examine the evidence. If she's really Liam's mother, she gets custody and Thorne has no claim. If she's not, well, then we'll know that too. Mackenzie studied her for a long moment. You're asking me to put my career on the line. I'm asking you to do what's right. That little boy has been dragged across the territory, torn from his father, locked in a wagon like a criminal. He's 3 years old, Colonel. 3. And right now you're the only person with the authority to help him. The colonel was silent for so long that Rhea thought he would refuse. Then he set down his glass with a sharp click and straightened his shoulders. All right, I'll convene a hearing. 1 hour. I'll have my clerk fetch Thorne and the woman. You'll need to get Reddick. The corporal on stockade duty is sympathetic. He'll let me take Jonas if you give the order. I'll write the order now. Mackenzie moved to his desk and began scribbling. Miss Calder, I hope you know what you're doing. If it goes wrong, we're no worse off than we are now. And if it goes right, we save a child. That's worth the risk. Mackenzie finished the order and handed it to her along with his personal seal. Give this to Corporal Davis at the stockade. And Miss Calder, thank you for reminding me what it means to be a soldier. We're supposed to protect the innocent, not bow to politicians and fanatics. Rhea took the papers and hurried back across the courtyard. Her heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. This could work. It had to work. Corporal Davis accepted the order without question, unlocking Jonas's chains and helping him to his feet. Jonas was unsteady. The beating and the hours in chains had taken their toll, but he gripped Rhea's shoulder and walked beside her toward Mackenzie's office. What's happening? He asked. A hearing. Mackenzie is going to sort out who has legal custody of Liam. If Nyla is really his mother, she'll get him. If not, we're back where we started. Jonas's voice was grim. Except now Thorne will be even more determined to make an example of me. We'll deal with that when we come to it. They reached the office just as Thorne and Drummond arrived, both of them furious at being summoned in the middle of the night. Nyla came too, escorted by 2 soldiers, her face calm but her eyes watchful. And behind them all, carried by a sympathetic private, was Liam, awake and confused and reaching for his father. Jonas made a strangled sound and started forward, but the guards blocked him. Not yet, Mackenzie said firmly. Everyone take a seat. This hearing is now in session. They settled around Mackenzie's office, Thorne and Drummond on one side, Jonas and Rhea on the other, Nyla standing alone in the middle. Liam was set on a chair in the corner, his eyes huge as he looked from one adult to another. Mackenzie stood behind his desk, his bearing military straight. This hearing has been convened under my authority as commanding officer of a federal installation to settle a dispute regarding custody of the child Liam Reddick. Agent Thorne, you claim authority under territorial law. Mr. Reddick, you claim paternal rights. And you, ma'am, state your name and your claim. Nyla lifted her chin. My name is Nyla of the Toahidliini clan. I am this boy's mother. I gave birth to him 3 years ago. His father claimed I died, but I lived. I have come to take my son back to my people where he belongs. That's impossible, Jonas said, his voice breaking. I watched you die. You can't be— Look at me, Nyla interrupted, turning to face him fully. Look at me and tell me you don't know my face. Jonas stared at her, and slowly, Rhea saw recognition dawn in his eyes, followed by confusion, followed by something like wonder. You do look like her, he whispered. You look exactly like her. But you can't be Nyla. You can't be. Why not? Because I buried her. I dug the grave myself and laid her in it and said prayers over her body. She was dead. I swear she was dead. Nyla's expression softened slightly. Yes, I was dead, or near enough that it made no difference, but my people, they came looking for me, found me still breathing, barely, took me back, healed me with old medicine. It took months before I could walk again, years before I was fully strong. And by then, her voice caught, by then, you'd already given our son away. I searched every settlement, every town, finally heard about a mountain man with a dark-haired boy, about Agent Thorne hunting them, and I knew I had to come. Silence filled the room. Rhea could hardly breathe. It was impossible. It was miraculous. It was— Prove it, Thorne said coldly. Anyone can claim to be the mother. Show us proof. I have the blanket I made for him. I showed you. Not enough. A blanket could be stolen. Nyla looked at Liam. Shima's son. Do you remember my songs? Liam nodded slowly. You sang about the stars, and the mountains, and the coyote who talked to the moon. That's right. Nyla began to sing, her voice low and haunting, words in Navajo that Rhea didn't understand but that seemed to resonate in the bones. And as she sang, Liam's face transformed. He slipped off his chair and walked to her, drawn by something deeper than memory. "Shima," he said, and wrapped his arms around her legs. Jonas made a sound between a sob and a laugh. "It's you. God help me, it's really you." Nyla gathered Liam up, still singing, and the boy buried his face in her neck. When the song ended, she looked at Mackenzie. "Is this proof enough?" "It's enough for me," Mackenzie said. "Under the terms of the Fort Laramie Treaty, I'm granting custody of the child to his mother, to be raised within her tribal community. Agent Thorne, your claim is dismissed." "You can't do that!" Thorne surged to his feet. "I have territorial authority." "You have territorial authority over children in white society. This child is being returned to Native society, which is federal jurisdiction. Your authority ends here." Mackenzie's voice was hard as iron. "If you have objections, take them up with the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington." Drummond stood as well, his hand on his pistol. "Colonel, you're overstepping your authority. When my superiors hear about this, they'll hear that I upheld federal treaty obligations over questionable territorial law. I'm comfortable with that position." Mackenzie gestured to his guards. "Escort these gentlemen out of the fort. If they attempt to interfere with my order, arrest them." For a moment, Rhea thought it would turn violent. Drummond's hand tightened on his pistol. Thorne's face was purple with rage. But then the office door opened and more soldiers filed in, not militia, but regular army, their rifles ready. Mackenzie had called for backup. Drummond read the situation and backed down. "This isn't over, Colonel." "Yes," Mackenzie said quietly. "It is. Get out of my fort." Thorne and Drummond were escorted out, their protests fading as they were marched toward the gate. Rhea watched them go and felt a weight lift from her chest. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd actually won. Jonas stood frozen, staring at Nyla and Liam. "I don't understand. You were dead. I buried you." "You buried someone," Nyla said gently. "But it wasn't me. Perhaps in your grief, in the darkness, you couldn't see clearly. Or perhaps my people made a substitution to help me escape. I don't know. I remember very little of that time." "But you're here now. You're alive," Jonas's voice broke. "And you have every right to hate me. I gave our son away. I thought I was doing what was best, but—" "You kept him alive," Nyla interrupted. "In the worst winter of my life, when I was too weak to even stand, the knowledge that you had him, that you would protect him, that's what kept me fighting. I knew you loved him. I never doubted that. But you want to take him back to your people." Nyla looked down at Liam, then back at Jonas. "I want him to be safe, to grow up knowing both his heritages, to be neither white nor Navajo, but something new, something strong." She paused. "I don't know if that's possible with your people. They seem determined to destroy anything that doesn't fit their narrow vision." "Not all of us," Rhea said quietly. "Some of us believe in something better." Nyla studied her with those dark, measuring eyes. "And who are you to this man, to this boy?" Rhea hesitated. What was she? A hired worker? A friend? Something more? "I'm family, if they'll have me." Jonas reached out and took her hand. "She's family, and she's right. Not all white people are like Thorne. Some of us just want to do right by the people we love." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Liam, still in Nyla's arms, reached out toward Jonas. "Papa? Are you sad?" Jonas's face crumpled. He crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around both Nyla and Liam, holding them close. "No, son. I'm not sad. I'm grateful. So grateful." They stood like that, the 3 of them together, and Rhea felt tears streaming down her face. This was what she'd been fighting for. This moment of reunion, of family restored, of love surviving against impossible odds. Mackenzie cleared his throat. "Miss Nyla, you're free to go. Take your son wherever you wish. Mr. Reddick, you're released from custody as well. All charges are dropped." "Thank you, Colonel," Jonas said without releasing his family. "Thank you for having the courage to do what's right." "Don't thank me. Thank Miss Calder. She's the one who wouldn't let me take the easy path." Mackenzie smiled tiredly. "Now all of you get out of my office. I have a long night of paperwork ahead of me, explaining to my superiors why I defied the territorial militia." They filed out into the cold night. The fort was quiet now, most of the soldiers asleep. Thorn and his men were gone, disappeared into the darkness beyond the gate. It felt like waking from a nightmare. Jonas set Liam down, and the boy immediately grabbed both his father's hand and Nyla's, forming a link between them. Are we going home now? Jonas and Nyla looked at each other across their son's head. I don't know where home is anymore, Jonas said. The cabin? Thorn knows about it. We can't go back there. Not safely. My people's winter camp is 3 days north, Nyla said. You would be welcome there, both of you. She looked at Rhea. All of you. Your people, they wouldn't mind? A white man and a white woman? Some would mind. Some would judge, Nyla shrugged. But my clan mother is wise. She will see what I see, that Liam needs all of us. That family is more than blood and skin. It's who stands with you when the world turns dark. Jonas looked at Rhea. What do you think? Rhea thought about the workhouse, about the auction platform, about a life of being invisible and unwanted. Then she thought about these past weeks. The danger and hardship, yes, but also the purpose, the feeling of mattering to someone, the discovery that she was stronger and braver than she'd ever known. I think, she said slowly, that I'd like to see what family feels like, real family, the kind you choose. Then it's settled. Jonas pulled Rhea close with one arm while keeping hold of Liam with the other. We go north, together. They left Fort Valor at first light, the four of them riding 2 horses with supplies Mackenzie had quietly provided. As they passed through the gate, Rhea looked back once at the fort, at the place where everything had nearly ended in tragedy, but had instead transformed into something new. The corporal on duty, Davis, the young man with the nephew, raised his hand in salute. Rhea returned it, grateful for his small acts of kindness that had helped save them all. The journey north was hard but different from their desperate flight into the mountains. This time they weren't running from something but traveling toward something. A place where Liam could be safe, where Jonas and Nyla could learn to be parents together again, where Rhea could finally discover what it meant to belong. Nyla rode with Liam, telling him stories about his heritage, teaching him words in Navajo. Jonas rode beside them, listening with an expression of wonder and grief and gratitude all mixed together. And Rhea rode slightly behind, watching this family knit itself back together and feeling her own heart expand to include them all. On the 3rd day, they reached the winter camp. It was larger than Rhea had expected, dozens of hogans clustered in a protected valley with smoke rising from fire pits and children playing in the snow. As they approached, people came out to see who was arriving. Nyla spoke rapidly in Navajo to an older woman who came forward. The woman's face was weathered like old leather, but her eyes were kind. She looked at Jonas, at Rhea, at Liam. Then she nodded and spoke, her voice carrying authority. My mother says you are welcome, Nyla translated. She says any family of mine is family to our clan. She says, Nyla's voice caught slightly. She says the boy has his father's eyes, but my mother's smile. She says he will grow strong here. They were given a hogan on the edge of the camp, small but warm, with a fire pit in the center and sleeping platforms around the sides. That first night, they sat around the fire while Nyla's mother brought food, mutton stew and fry bread, familiar enough to Jonas but exotic to Rhea. The old woman spoke in Navajo, and Nyla translated, explaining the rules of the camp, the rhythms of their days, what would be expected of the newcomers. She says you must learn our ways if you stay, the language, the customs. She says Liam must know where he comes from, must understand both halves of himself. Nyla looked at Jonas. Can you accept that? I can, Jonas said. I want him to know his mother's people. Want him to be proud of who he is. And you? Nyla looked at Rhea. This is not your fight, not your family. You could leave. Go back to your own people. Rhea thought about the workhouse, about Sister Margaret's cold disapproval, about standing on that auction platform while people bid pennies. Then she looked around the warm hogan, at Jonas and Liam and Nyla, at the old woman who'd welcomed strangers without hesitation. I don't want to leave, she said. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay. I'd like to learn your ways. I'd like to... She stopped, struggling with words. I'd like to be part of something that matters. Nyla reached across the fire and took Rhea's hand. Then you are my sister. And this She gestured to the Hogan, to Liam sleeping peacefully on his platform, to Jonas watching them both with tears in his eyes. This is your family. The winter passed slowly, marked by snow and cold and the quiet rhythms of camp life. Rhea learned to speak basic Navajo, to cook traditional foods, to weave on a loom under Nyla's patient instruction. Jonas learned the songs and stories, taught some of the men to track and trap in exchange for learning their horsemanship. And Liam flourished, running with the other children, learning 2 languages simultaneously, growing strong and healthy, and secure in the knowledge that he was loved by not 1 or 2, but 3 parents who would protect him with their lives. In the spring, word came from Fort Valor. Colonel Mackenzie had been reassigned, not punished exactly, but moved to a different post where his independence of thought would be less problematic to his superiors. The letter included a note for Jonas. The territorial legislature is considering repeal of the Purity Protection Act. Public opinion has turned against Thorne and his methods. Your case helped change minds. Be well and take care of that boy. Jonas read the letter aloud to Rhea and Nyla as they sat outside the Hogan, watching Liam play with the other children. He did it, Jonas said wonderingly. Mackenzie actually changed something. We all did, Rhea said. We stood up when it mattered, refused to accept that cruelty was inevitable. And now? Nyla asked. The cabin is still yours, Jonas. We could go back if you wanted. Jonas looked at the camp spread before them, at Liam laughing as he chased another boy through the sage. I don't think I want to go back. This feels more like home than that cabin ever did. Even though you're the only white man here? I'm not the only one. Jonas smiled at Rhea. And besides, I'm learning. Your mother says I almost sound like a real person when I speak Navajo now, not just a man with rocks in his mouth. Nyla laughed, and the sound was like water over stones, clear and bright. She likes you. She told me yesterday that you have a good heart, even if your pronunciation is terrible. As summer came and the snows melted, Jonas built an addition to the Hogan, making more space for their growing family. Because by then, it was clear that Rhea was staying permanently, that she'd found what she'd been searching for all her life without knowing it, a place to belong, people who valued her not for what she could do for them, but for who she was. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the valley gold and crimson, Jonas turned to Rhea. I never thanked you properly for everything you did, for refusing to give up on us. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Because you saved us, Rhea. Not just Liam, all of us. You saved me from despair. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite it. Rhea felt her throat tighten with emotion. You saved me too. On that auction platform, when everyone else saw something worthless, you saw a person. You gave me dignity when I had none. You showed me I was stronger than I knew. Jonas took her hand, and this time there was something different in the gesture. Something that spoke of possibility, of a future they might build together. I care for you, Rhea called her. More than I probably should, given everything that's happened. But I wanted you to know. I wanted you to have the choice. Rhea looked at this man who'd been a stranger just months ago, who'd become a friend and then something more precious. Family. She thought about the journey they'd taken together, the hardships they'd endured, the way they'd stood side by side against impossible odds. I care for you too, she said quietly, and I choose this. I choose you. I choose all of you. They sat in silence as the sun sank below the mountains, their hands clasped, their hearts settling into something like peace. Liam ran up to them, breathless and happy, and climbed onto Jonas's lap. Nyla emerged from the Hogan and sat beside them, completing their circle. Tell us a story, Papa, Liam demanded. Tell us about the mountains. Jonas gathered his son close and began to speak, his deep voice weaving words into magic. He told of a journey through winter, of brave people who refused to surrender to hate, a family formed not by blood alone but by choice and courage and love. And as he spoke, the stars came out one by one overhead, ancient and eternal, watching over this small family that had fought so hard to exist. This family that proved love was stronger than law, that mercy mattered more than purity, that the bonds we choose are often stronger than the ones we're born with. Ria leaned her head on Jonas's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling Nyla's hand find hers, feeling Liam's small body warm and safe between them. This was home. Not a place, but a people. Not walls and roof, but love and acceptance. She thought about that day on the auction platform, about Jonas's voice cutting through the crowd. I'll take her. 3 words that had changed everything. 3 words that had led to this moment, to this family, to this life she'd never dared to imagine, but that had somehow, miraculously, become hers. Thank you, she whispered, so quietly that only Jonas heard. He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her temple. Thank you, he whispered back. And under the vast western sky, surrounded by mountains that had witnessed their struggle and their triumph, the family that had chosen each other sat together in perfect peace, watching the stars emerge and knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, always together, forever home.